The Fate of Austria. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 401 International Students. Austria Vienna Point. The Swiss Independence Alliance hopes that Austria can send officers to command and train their troops, because most of the experienced mercenaries and officers serve in the Free Alliance, while the most experienced generals on their side have only commanded a regiment and fought against smugglers. The actual commanders are the priest Bilid and Ulrich Salis. The former is a guy who has only seen fighting in fairy tales, and the latter is an unqualified teacher who often relies on authority to suppress his students. On the contrary, Generals Henry Duffer and Frey Hollos of the Free Alliance, one had followed Napoleon in the north and south, and the other was the general who had participated in the most battles in Switzerland. It is also impossible to directly send active duty officers and soldiers to Switzerland. The senior officials of the Austrian Empire know what this means. This meant that the Austrians themselves abandoned the Vienna system at a time when at least a semblance of peace in Europe was important to Austria. It will take time for Austria's scientific and technological achievements and overseas colonies to be transformed into national strength. Likewise, the German Customs Union and the Apennine Customs Union also need a peaceful environment. The top leaders of the Austrian Empire believe that, if it continues to develop like this for decades, it will be able to fight against the British Empire and Russia. But in Franz's eyes, the real value of peace to Austria was the suppression of domestic conflicts during the previous Luxembourg crisis. The Hungarian side was even organizing an army. As for whether Kinkin still wanted to change things, only they themselves knew. At the same time, northern Italy, Bohemia, and even overseas colonies and people hiding in corners are also ready to move. Franz didn't think they could succeed. At best, they would dig their own graves after Austria's victory. The crowd celebrating the victory did not know how many people who planned to overthrow the rule of the Habsburg family yesterday were hidden. In fact, many people have seen this, but there is nothing they can do. In the end, they can only deal with a few unlucky people who are insignificant. Therefore, Austria will not be involved in the European war in the short term, but it cannot send troops, which does not mean that it cannot help with training. Of course, we can't say that on the surface, but we should call it learning and communication. Let the officers of the Swiss Orthodox Union go to Austria to study. Firstly, it will teach them how to fight, and secondly, it will also be used to win over them. Franz knew very well that no matter how much money he spent to bribe more officials, it would not be more effective than directly cultivating a group of spiritual Austrians. Franz's proposal was immediately recognized by Count Korolaf and Prince Metternich. They did not want to get involved in the Swiss Civil War, but there was no reason not to do things that could expand their influence. But at this time, Archduke Franz Karol and Archduke Louis raised objections in accordance with the emperor's wishes. The reason was that Austria was deeply in debt and had no money to support other countries. Of course, this reason was not said by the two Grand Dukes, but by Mr. Sloat, the smart aleck chief royal advisor. He felt it was necessary to establish a good relationship with the two powerful figures and show off his talents, but it further exposed the incompetence of the chief advisor. Franz even doubted whether Queen Anna made peace with him, because she saw that this person was incompetent and easy to control. Faced with this absurd reason, Franz directly proposed the even more absurd solution of letting the other party study at his own expense. In the end, the proposal was approved, and Switzerland funded the study in Austria at its own expense. Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace. Franz rarely attended such formal meetings. After all, he was only a child. In fact, this kind of meeting made him feel very embarrassed, because although there were hundreds of people participating, only dozens of people could observe, and only a few people could really speak. This atmosphere is not conducive to solving problems. It is no wonder that the decision-making institutions of the Austrian Empire have lost their minds throughout history, making idiotic judgments and stupid decisions one after another. One of them was to ask Marshal Radetzky to abandon the entire Italy, but the veteran general proved that he was right with practical actions. Historically, Radetzky's victory could be described as turning the tide from falling and supporting the building. that was about to collapse for the Austrian Empire. Without the victory in Italy, I'm afraid that Austria would have become a second-rate country long ago, and it would not even wait for the Tsar to intervene. Because Franz helped the Italian army resolve its knot, Marshal Radetzky's reputation was better than ever in history. The local Italians also changed the name of him from Papa Radetzky to the more dignified title of Voltfather. The so-called knot of the Italian Legion was mentioned in the previous document. It was Marshal Radetzky's almost humble show of kindness, requiring the soldiers not to fight back or scold the locals. Even his third son was ordered to defend the locals. The national honor was also favored by the Italians. Legend has it that the third son of Marshal Radetzky died of depression because of this. His third son was also the most capable of his many children. Evil people should not be tolerated, and good people should not be unjust, to a certain extent. This sentence turned northern Italy into the most honest region in Austria and even Europe. Rebel forces, gangs, unscrupulous businessmen, and even corrupt criminals sent by Austria were severely punished. Coupled with the continuous economic development of the Austrian Empire, the living standards of the local people have been greatly improved. Especially for the military, since unscrupulous businessmen and corrupt officials have been cracked down on, their military pay is no longer deducted, and they no longer have to eat rotten and moldy food sent by suppliers. In addition, Marshal Radetzky himself was a very kind man. He allowed the army to purchase land to grow crops and raise livestock to improve food. However, one thing is that the food of the army must not appear in the market, because it is understandable that the soldiers want to improve their food, but the army's business is definitely a destabilizing factor for a country. Leaving aside the fact that competing with the people for profit will affect the country's image once the military, as a state violence institution, can become self-sufficient, it will be hard to say whether it will be the country's army or the country's army. Fortunately, Marshal Radetzky was a very transparent person, and Franz only needed to write a few words to understand the meaning behind it. Generally speaking, the economy of northern Italy has developed rapidly over the years, especially the development of foreign trade and railway transportation, which has made it very profitable. The state uses local tax revenue to feed agriculture, and the large-scale use of chemical fertilizers and agricultural machinery has greatly improved food production and work efficiency. The excess population has promoted the development of the service industry, and the number of people working overseas and in other areas is also increasing. When people have money and broaden their horizons, their demand for culture and spirituality will increase. In less than 10 years after the establishment of the Apennine Customs Union, more than 500 churches and more than 1,000 schools were built in northern Italy. But no matter what, there will always be some people who are dissatisfied with the status quo, and these people always have various reasons to come together. Franz didn't care about those people or their reasons, he just hoped that they would be ready to die before rebelling. Chapter 402. The Queen is going on a trip. UK, London, Downing Street. Robert Peel, the leader of the Royalists, was embarrassed by the fact that he was not welcomed by the Queen for so long. In order to regain the Queen's attention, Robert Peel publicly declared that when it comes to personnel appointments in the Queen's palace, he will definitely listen to Queen Victoria's opinions and will not easily change the personnel around the Queen. What Robert Peel said is true. He does have this power in theory as Prime Minister, but his words are very harsh, and to ordinary people, it seems that the Prime Minister controls the Queen. This was especially the case with the Chartists, whose demands were not met and were suppressed. At first they got a promise from the Queen and the group disbanded. However, the Whig government at the time did not acknowledge the debt, and Prime Minister Viscount Melbourne even claimed that, even if the North Sea is filled up, it will not be able to increase wages for workers. But, with the Whigs out of power, the pressure came to Robert Peel. The ill-fated politician had to endure much that he should not have suffered. At this time, Britain's domestic economic crisis was coupled with the labour movement and riots in overseas colonies. There seems to be a fungal disease in agriculture, and the grain harvest may fail this year. Of course, although a bad harvest is a bad thing for Britain, it is a good thing for him personally. After all, he can better promote his theory. Free trade. Internationally, Britain had almost no good relations with all the great powers at this time. The Whigs had suppressed France too much before, even leading to the crisis in La Plata. Argentina wanted to isolate the Russians, but accidentally pushed Russia to the Austrian side. Conflicts with the United States continued, especially in the Oregon region, where the number of Americans had completely overwhelmed the number of British colonists. Although the Oregon region is still managed by the British, if no action is taken, it will only be a matter of time before it is lost. The issue of which side to take during the Luxembourg crisis offended the entire German Confederation, and even Hanover, the Queen's hometown, had to draw a clear line with Britain. This was a huge diplomatic disaster in the eyes of Robert Peel. In order to prevent Austria from becoming a dominant player in Central Europe, especially the possible annexation of Italy, Britain set up many obstacles, but it seemed to get nothing, except jealousy from Austria. Austria still has unparalleled influence in Italy, and countries like Serbia and the Ottomans can hardly pose a threat to it. In addition, a Grand Duke of the Habsburg family seems to have accepted the invitation of the Jacobite Party. This can be regarded as Austria's counterattack against Britain's increasing pressure. However, Robert Peel did not take this matter to heart at this time, because Britain now has almost no allies around the world, and war may break out at any time. Even the proud industries suffered frequent setbacks. Robert Peel felt that his burden seemed to be heavy. Just as he was thinking of a solution, the Queen seemed to fall in love with sea voyages. This was an inconsequential matter, but the Queen's chosen destination was Paris. This is worth pondering. Although the Queen may only take it as a private trip, visiting relatives, the political value it may bring is immeasurable. Robert Peel planned to use this to ease relations with France, because France was both his opponent and best ally in his quest for world hegemony. After all, both countries have the same enemy, the Holy Alliance. The Triple Alliance of Russia, Prussia, and Austria is too powerful. The so-called continental balance of power policy does not want a peaceful, prosperous, and powerful Europe. Instead, it is a Europe that is in chaos, unable to confront Britain, and full of business opportunities. The French naturally became Britain's natural allies, because the Vienna system itself was a yoke that restricted France. A ferocious beast cannot be willing to be trapped in a cage for its entire life, and the same is true for France. This is exactly what Robert Peel wanted to crack, and the Queen's trip is undoubtedly of great value. This will be the first time Queen Victoria has set foot on foreign soil. Hanover used to be a Commonwealth of Britain, and will also be the first person to visit France since Henry VIII. The King of Gluttony, reportedly with a waist circumference of 155 centimeters, in 1520 of the British monarch. Of course, this is not a show of goodwill, it is just showing another possibility to the French, and it is a signal of cooperation. It is also a warning to Russia, Prussia, and Austria. Britain is not without allies. However, this trip did not go smoothly, because Queen Victoria had been assassinated before. And not just once. At the same time, their queen is a little reckless. Sunday, May 29, 1842. Queen Victoria was passing through Green Park in a carriage. When she was joking with Prince Albert, she accidentally opened the window and saw a man pointing a pistol at her not far away. When the man saw Queen Victoria looking in his direction, he immediately blended into the crowd and ran away. The Queen did not say anything afterwards, but decided to pass by Green Park again that afternoon. Although the accompanying ministers tried their best to stop it, Queen Victoria still insisted on going her own way. She said, "I would rather take a risk than live in danger all the time." Eventually, the Queen passed through Green Park for the second time, and this time the prepared royal guards did not let the assassin escape. However, the Queen's behavior frightened the British Parliament and ministers. In case Victoria was assassinated in France, or even died in France. What should the British government do? Due to the Queen's people-friendly attitude and hard-working attitude, when she first came to the throne, she won a lot of people's hearts, but then she suddenly became reclusive and no longer cared about politics. Married Albert. This made some conspiracy theorists think that Congress had kidnapped the Queen. After all, Victoria had previously promised to give workers a 10-hour working day and a series of social benefits and reforms, but now none of them have been completed. If the Queen were assassinated in France, the British government would be discredited. Therefore, Security work will be the top priority for this trip, but on French soil, security work cannot be entirely handled by the UK, which involves many issues of course. Robert Peel did not think that the French would assassinate Victoria. After all, although the two countries had disputes, they were far from a life or death situation point, and assassinating a head of state is far less cost effective than kidnapping as a hostage point of course. In order to prevent such extreme things from happening, Britain has long enacted the Regency Act in history, which means that when the Queen needs to leave the UK, she needs to designate a regent or multiple judges to perform the duties of the monarch. Since then, the Royal Council has been acting as Queen Victoria's Prince Regent, and Victoria has become one of the most frequently visited rulers in British history. The Queen and her husband are scheduled to visit France in 6 months' time, and Robert Peel must solve all possible problems. As soon as this news came out, it immediately shocked the whole of Europe. Countless forces were ready to take action. Where will the undercurrent of the world go? Chapter 403 Undercurrent. Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace. Franz frowned as he looked at the newspaper. Britain is making overtures to France, which is much more troublesome than the civil war in Switzerland. If Britain and France join forces, it is possible to carve up the world outside of Europe. After all, their strength at sea is unmatched. Even the entire Holy Alliance navy combined was unable to fight against Britain, let alone France. Britain and France must not and cannot join forces, but Franz still had to prepare for the worst. Assassination was the first word that came to his mind. That's right. As long as Queen Victoria dies in France, it will be difficult to have trust between the two countries, let alone an alliance. Low cost, high return, and it doesn't even have to be successful. As long as any one of the parties can refuse to meet, it will achieve the goal. The only thing you need to pay attention to is not to reveal your flaws. Paris, France. Louis Philippe sat silent at his desk. Old Marshal Soult was also silent, and the big shots of the July dynasty did not dare to speak. Because the benefits of cooperation between Britain and France are so great. If the two sides form an alliance, France will have less worries and can continue to expand its territory in the world. If it can get the support of Britain, France can even directly attack the United States and Mexico. However, the risk is also very high. The Holy Alliance is opposed to the alliance between Britain and France. And if Queen Victoria was assassinated in France, would it be an excuse to start a war? No one knows what the three countries of the Holy Alliance, Russia, Prussia, and Austria, think. If Britain and France go to war, will they participate in the war in exchange for the opportunity to carve up French land? Louis Philippe was an overly cautious man who wanted to make huge profits, but was hesitant to do so. He was hoping at this point that someone would come out and come up with an idea so he could continue with a non-stick pan. The old Marshal Soult just wanted to retire peacefully, and the pot was too big. If something happened, it would not be a matter of life and death. He might even be dragged to take the blame for his life. Other senior leaders have similar ideas. France is now in trouble because it has taken two big steps before. What it should do is to recuperate rather than continue to take risks. Of course, if everything goes as expected, France will not need to continue to recuperate, but can directly participate in the global hegemony. But if the egg is involved again, I'm afraid I will really stop moving forward, and I'm afraid I will have to spit out most of the things I got before, which is really not worth the gain. But Louis Philippe was a very greedy man. He wanted everything. If someone tells him that you can't get this, that person will definitely be jealous, and in palace politics, if he is jealous of the king, his political future may end there. So no one wants or dares to stand out. The situation was so embarrassing that it was a bit overwhelming. Just then Guizot rushed back. In fact, he had never left Paris. It was just his secretary who went to Texas. When Guizot got the news that the Queen of England was going to visit Paris, he was so excited that he couldn't sleep all night. It was no longer a dream for Britain and France to jointly carve up the world. Your Majesty, your meeting with Queen Victoria will witness a historic moment. This means that hundreds of years of hatred between Britain and France will come to an end, and it means the glorious future of France. In fact, it is difficult for others to understand Guizot's sentiments as a pro-British faction, but Louis Philippe has been waiting to get off the horse. He did not care about how Gizzard returned to Paris. What was important was that he decided to meet with the Queen of England in September to discuss the future of Europe and the world. In fact, the moment the French credentials arrived in England, Franz felt that Robert Peel had succeeded and his goal had been achieved. It doesn't even matter whether the Queen goes to Paris or not, because from this moment on, Britain and France have the intention to cooperate. The conflict between Britain and France has been alleviated, and Britain has won a breathing space for itself, which has also made the Holy Alliance afraid. If Britain and France really form an alliance, they will become the most terrifying political and military bloc in the world. Of course, this kind of alliance often cannot last long and each has its own agenda. It will not become a force that rules the world. However, the Europeans at that time were still very sincere and they must complete this visit. The Bonapartists in France were actually not interested in forming an alliance with Britain, and there were even some more extreme people who wanted to assassinate Victoria to avenge Napoleon. Although he didn't know the structure of their brain circuits, Franz applauded this approach with both hands. Although it was a bit inhumane, the benefits were too high. Generally speaking, the Bonapartists are still more inclined to oppose the British, because the biggest obstacle for France to dominate the world is the British. They did not take the Holy Alliance seriously, especially the performance of the German Confederation in Luxembourg, which led the Bonapartists to conclude that the German Confederation was just a large experience package. After capturing Berlin in 18 days and conquering Vienna twice, the glory of the Napoleonic era seemed to be back. But Louis Napoleon in prison did not think so. He felt that the Vienna system was France's biggest enemy, and for this reason it should first use the power of the British to dismantle the Holy Alliance. Then retake Italy from Austria to strengthen France's strength, then attack the Rhine region, and then manage North and West Africa to turn the Mediterranean into France's inland sea, and then consider the issue of world hegemony. Louis Napoleon expressed his views on the matter, and the prisoners were actually used to it, calling him His Majesty the President. The clown next door with his strange face paint gave the opposite opinion. If Louis Philippe really does this, when will you be able to become His Majesty the Emperor? Now you have no money, no one, and even your name was stolen from you. If it weren't for the chaos in the world, how could you have a chance? GG. The clown made a weird laugh, but what he said made sense. Louis Napoleon thought for a while and retorted, "It is the people of France who suffer from the war. How can we eradicate poverty in a war-torn world?" The clown pulled out a handkerchief from nowhere, unfolded it flatly, and then with a flick of his hand, a book emerged, which was The Abolition of Poverty, that Louis Napoleon had been writing. Do you want France, or do you want to eradicate poverty? GG. Being ridiculed mercilessly, Louis Napoleon would have fought with him before he was imprisoned, but he learned many things in prison, including tolerance and humility. Then, what should I do? I'm just a prisoner in prison now. Of course you should hire a professional to kill someone. GG. The clown looked at the Oriental man who was hanging his legs on the fence and doing abdominal crunches. He can't even get out of prison. How can he kill people? What you see is not necessarily the truth, and what you think is not necessarily the truth. Maybe he is just here waiting for business. GG. Chapter 404 Undercurrent. Amsterdam, the Netherlands. If the Queen of England died in France, no one would continue to want to break up the Netherlands. What did you say? Do you know what you are talking about? William II was very angry, but this anger was both nervous and exciting. I said the British and the French are fighting, so you can sit back and relax. My dear. Caroline hugged William II's neck, but this time the warm nephrite in her arms could not eliminate his doubt. Do you know what you do is tantamount to challenging tradition and the entire monarchy. Caroline let go of William II's hand and snorted, "Can you keep your country and your power by observing tradition? In fact, taking back Flemish should have been a good thing, but domestic religious conflicts have intensified, and ministers have demanded that the Catholics in Flemish be exiled to Austria. This approach was completely incomprehensible to William II, but not only within the palace, but also the people took to the streets to demand the expulsion of heretics, and those heresies were also ready to flee to Austria, which was relatively religiously tolerant. The driving force behind this incident is naturally Franz. After all, people have an instinctive fear of the unknown. Fleming's future and destiny are unknown. As long as there is a little catalyst, it will be a stormy sea. Austria is already familiar with resettling immigrants. Anyway, there are large areas of land around Hungary and overseas. Various cities can also provide a large number of jobs. Even if there are millions of immigrants, they can still accommodate them. However, in order to avoid tragedies like the partition of India and Pakistan, France still hoped that they could use sea routes and railways. For this reason, France decided to provide subsidies. The total amount may cost 30 to 50 million florins. Plus land and other resettlement costs, it may even exceed 300 million florins. This made France feel the difficulty of migration for the first time. Previously, the brutal violence and religious influence in Central America, coupled with the support of California's gold mines, did not make him feel any physical pain. At this time, France finally felt the pressure, and when the Great Famine occurred later, millions of people in Ireland would probably flee. By then, he was not sure whether he had the ability to solve the problem, or whether it would be the same as in history. What about leaving corpses everywhere? At this time, in addition to the religious conflicts that caused William II a headache in the Netherlands, after joining the German customs union, the power of businessmen further grew. They wanted power, and made the Netherlands a constitutional country. Since ancient times, no one in power has been willing to take the initiative to relinquish power, and William II was no exception. He firmly opposed the constitutional monarchy. As a result, businessmen and ministers continued to come into contact with the British. Their behavior made William II uneasy, but there was nothing he could do. Combined with what Caroline said, William II finally thought that it seemed that traditional methods could not retain power. If he gave up power, would he end up with the same fate as Louis XVI? William II looked at Caroline again with eyes full of guilt. It turns out you are doing it for my own good. Russia, St. Petersburg. In the Winter Palace, Tsar Nicholas I was chewing steak. The finance minister is reading out the most gorgeous income statement in recent years. From the second half of last year to the first half of today, Russia's treasury income increased by 23% in 1 year, including a gift of 10 million florins from the German Confederation. You must know that the previous annual growth rate was around 3%, and trade with Austria has greatly increased the income of the Russian treasury. Foreign Minister Nisolov was also very proud, but what he brought was really not good news for Russia. The Queen's visit to France is a very dangerous signal. You must know that, because Russia has not given up its privileges in the Strait area, the British are always pressing forward step by step. If Britain and France join forces, can Russia still be able to defend a country that has been conquered by generations of czars? Now the importance of the Straits to Russia has further increased. If it is not possible to pass through the Black Sea Strait casually, or tariffs need to be paid to the Ottoman Empire, this will jeopardize the cotton trade between Russia and Austria. Some people must want to ask why cotton is not transported by land. First, there is the Carpathian Mountains between Russia and Austria. Second, Russia does not even have a few kilometers of railways at this time. The Tsar did not want to give up this money tree at all. Not only Nicholas I, but the entire Russian top brass felt that this was a money tree. Because Austria sits on the two major markets of Germany and the Apennines, and its own size is also large. Its consumption power is unprecedented for the Russians. It's just that this is Russia, and no one dares to say anything unless the Tsar speaks. I can only make circumstantial remarks one by one about how important the Austrian market is to Russia, and how good your relationship is with Archduke Karol. While enjoying the table full of delicacies, that Tsar listened to the reports and boasts of his ministers. The delicious food on the table was quickly wiped out like a whirlwind, and Nicholas I picked up a large glass of red wine, and drank it all in one gulp. Seeing the Tsar eating like this made everyone hungry, but on the surface they still wanted to flatter him. What should I do if someone thinks I don't have enough to eat? Nicholas I suddenly asked. It was a bit confusing for a moment, but soon someone came to their senses. Damn it. The Tsar is the master of all Russia, and anyone who disobeys you must die. This man is Duke Liubey, the highest officer of the Special Third Section, and one of the most feared people in Russia. The Tsar smiled and continued to ask, what if it's a foreigner? You deserve to die. Duke Liu replied readily, okay, go ahead and do it. I'm waiting for your good news. Prussia, Berlin. Frederick William IV paced back and forth in the palace. You must know that it was Prussia guarding the western gate of Germany at this time, not Austria, which only had an enclave, or the newly liberated Luxembourg. If Britain and France really united, would they attack Prussia? That's right. William IV was such a worry-free guy, completely lacking in the military adventurous spirit of his ancestors. Your Majesty, you don't need to worry. The British just want to find some allies. It can be the French, or of course it can be us. Friedrich. Liszt said softly, how can this be done? What if it's nothing? Austria is doing business with the Russians, and Bavaria, Baden, Württemberg, and France have never stopped trading. If they can do it, why can't we? By doing this, we not only don't have to worry about future wars spreading to Prussia, but we can also use British goods to strengthen our power. In fact, Friedrich List went to Paris after leaving Washington, but he was not reused until he met Bismarck, who was traveling here, and the two hit it off. Under Bismarck's persuasion, Friedrich List returned to Berlin. As for the opium wine incident, it had long been forgotten by Frederick William IV. After all, the doctor who transfused cheap blood had long been punished. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 405. Nanyang, Nandming, Southeast Asia, Kalimantan. Zhu Qiangying was sitting in the palace of the Brunei king in a daze. Just a year ago, she could only wander around Southeast Asia with the troop, sleeping in the open air, and being bullied by others. Life is hard, but the class teacher is a good person and the sisters take good care of her. It's just that the sky has unforeseen circumstances, and people have misfortunes and blessings. While performing on stage, a sister was molested by a drunkard, and the class leader stepped in to drive the drunken away. This was a common thing, and no one took it to heart at first. But he didn't expect that the drunkard had a good background, and was actually the domestic slave of Mr. Lan Fang. The class leader and the sisters packed up their things overnight, and prepared to escape, but they were still a step too late, and were stopped. As soon as they left the sea. The leader was the drunkard that day. When the class leader came to negotiate, he was killed and thrown into the sea. If you are wise, follow me back. When my brothers and I are angry, we will let you go. Otherwise, this is what will happen. The drunkard laughed wildly. His name was Gu Peng, one of the two generals of the Gu family. Those who are harsh will be repaid. Gu Peng's words are naturally lies, but he succeeds every time, because people who come to Nanyang to seek life often have no way out. Falling into desperate situations again at this time often leads to people's inner collapse, and choosing to accept the situation. Moreover, what Gu Peng said was not all lies. This is the territory of Lan Fang Company. With his identity, he can kill a few foreigners, and then accuse him of any crime and no one will pursue him. Moreover, because he is Gu Shishan, the eldest son of the Gu family, no one dared to investigate what he had done. However, the troop are people who make a living by performing arts. They have seen too many right and wrong and unpredictable people, and no one believes what the water bandits say. The world is tough, and it takes courage to survive, and these delicate women just have it. Uncle, what do you think of me? A beautiful woman said with a smile. She was the eldest sister in the troop. Although she usually bullied others, she stood up at this time. Gu Peng swallowed his saliva immediately when he saw the woman. Not bad, quite fresh and interesting. Haha, the thugs around him also started laughing. Then, you come here, and I will take care of you. How about you let our sisters live? The woman continued. Gu Peng laughed wantonly, and suddenly there was a gunshot, and a blood flower exploded from the woman's chest, slowly blooming on her white shirt, and a hairpin in her hand fell off. Without waiting for the drunkard's instructions, other thugs jumped on the boat to grab money and people. The other women on the boat had no time to grieve or think too much and immediately jumped into the water in different directions to escape. Point of course, only a handful of people could escape from the clutches of the devil, and only Zhu Qiangying swam to the shore alive. Zhu Qiangying breathed a sigh of relief, and from that day on she decided to take revenge. But it is not easy for a helpless woman to seek revenge. She can only wait for the opportunity. When Zhu Qiangying heard that Nanmingqiu's reinforcement had finally arrived, she knew what she should do. Although Zhu Qiangying has never attended a private school, she has learned a lot of knowledge and principles by singing opera every day. Then came that extremely embarrassing meeting. When she saw Franz and Friedrich, she was a little confused and thought, why are the barbarian chiefs just children? Later, when Franz communicated with Zhu Qiangying in Chinese and took out a box of jade seals, she finally couldn't stand it anymore and fainted. When Zhu Qiangying woke up, she found that the other party had already formulated a complete plan. Coupled with her understanding of Nanyang, she made some corrections to the plan. The two talked for a long night, and Franz left some money and weapons and left. Afterwards, she boarded a sailboat selling piglets. After killing 2 human traffickers, she made an impassioned speech, and those people kowtowed to her like crazy. Conquered Zhoushan and Hessian Company on Natuna Island, and then defeated several local kings on Kalimantan Island one after another. At this moment, Zhu Qiangying was in the palace of the once most powerful indigenous king on Kalimantan. She was still holding the jade seal given to her by Franz in her hand. Everything seemed like a lifetime ago. To be honest, Zhu Qiangying didn't know what an emperor should look like, but she imitated the appearance in the drama and demanded herself. At this time, most of the officials of Nanming had never seen what the nobleman looked like, but almost none of them had not read the play. Zhu Qiangying's appearance just matched their imagination of a nobleman, so the theory of Nanming orthodoxy came into being. The Nanming Empire seems to have been established in this way. Not long ago, the Dagon Company in Pontianak also sent an envoy to express its willingness to surrender. Only the Lanfang Company still relied on the power of the Dutch to resist. However, the Dutch's attitude towards the Nanming Empire has suddenly changed dramatically recently, from hostility to cooperation. At this time, a white man with a hooked nose stood under her royal steps. He was the envoy of the East India Company, Her Royal Highness the Queen of the Nanming Empire. I'm the envoy of the British East India Company, and my name is William Hawke. First of all, I would like to congratulate you on occupying the city of Brunei. It only took you 1 year to become the largest Chinese force in Nanyang. It's really gratifying to be the leader. William Hawke was a China expert, but he didn't have much respect for this ancient eastern country, especially after that war, which made him more certain of its barbaric and weak nature. But the woman in front of me is an exception. In other words, the British are more or less in awe of the combination of pirates and queens, but more importantly, the army under her command was fanatical and well disciplined despite its backward equipment. This is undoubtedly a terrifying army. Zhu Qiangying most often plays martial arts students and niche students on stage, so she always has a heroic spirit. She didn't like the British, but she knew that Britain was the most powerful maritime country in the world at this time. Mr. Messenger, you are not just here to congratulate me, William. Hawke smiled and immediately took out a scroll. Her Royal Highness, we are willing to recognize you and your Nanming, but you must also guarantee British interests in Brunei and accept the treaty signed by the King of Brunei. Zhu Qiangying raised her eyebrows slightly, and she knew that the British guy was up to no good. The Brunei King sent people to harass Nanming's territory several times before, but she only dared to retaliate after the British warships left the port. It's just that I didn't expect the Brunei native king to be so inexperienced. After the two sides fought a few battles, the natives chopped off their native king and surrendered. Although the overall situation was decided at this time, Zhu Qiangying was still unwilling to break up with the British, so she took a look at the treaty. In fact, the British do not have many interests in Brunei, and the treaties are just some agreements on free trade and port leases, but there were terms she couldn't agree to. This opium, Zhu Qiangying muttered. William Hawke cursed secretly. Damn big smoker, you gave me a false alarm. Don't worry, Her Majesty the Queen. We will not interrupt the supply of opium to Kalimantan, and I guarantee that the opium supplied to you in the future will be of the highest quality. Pangong 2 is the opium produced in Bangladesh and is considered the best drug. Zhu Kyang shook her head. Why? Do you like golden flower soil? The taste is really strong. William Hawke said with a lewd smile. Janhua 2 is the opium produced in the Ottoman Empire. It is said to have aphrodisiac and aphrodisiac effects. No, I want to end the opium trade. That's the bottom line. Chapter 406 Emerald Island. 1843. Island Point. The summer is extremely hot, and the potato late blight that was still raging everywhere seems to have disappeared out of thin air. But instead it was unusually hot, and most people chose to stay home. In fact, poor people prefer heat to cold, because cold consumes precious fuel, while hot only requires drinking water, and there is no need to do farm work. Except those who had suffered from late potato blight before, and had to walk into the fields under the scorching sun. Fortunately, potatoes are a very hardy crop, and do not have high seasonal requirements. You can plant them now and harvest them before winter comes, but going for weeks without rain is still worrying. Scathach stayed at home and watched the grass turn from green to yellow and then to die. She thought, if the plants on the entire island of Ireland turn yellow, will no one call Ireland the Emerald Island? Maybe it's called Topaz Island? What about in winter? White Jewel Island? Or Diamond Island sounds better. The more Scathach Jennings thought about it, the more annoyed he became. Finally he couldn't sit still and asked his brothers and sisters to go out to collect hay. Although the children were reluctant, they still gave in under the strong power of their sister. Scathach didn't want to wait until winter to collect hay, because every household was collecting it at that time, and children like them couldn't get it. Another underlying logic is that, since it is too hot to sleep in summer, it must not be too cold to sleep in winter at this moment. Shaka's head was shining with the light of wisdom. As the eldest brother in the family, Patrick did not want to mess around with his younger brothers and sisters. Selling the pigs at home for a good price is the most important thing in his mind. After all, after reading books and gaining knowledge, he feels that money is the most important thing, whether he wants to live with dignity or save Ireland. Money is necessary. Shaka's parents were talking in their hut, and they also wanted to sell the pig at a high price. But the purpose is different. They don't consider dignity or big things like saving Ireland. They just want to live and keep their families alive. It's so hot in the summer, and it must be even harder in the winter. Yes, there will definitely be people in the village who can't bear it. Sell the pigs at a good price and rent a few more acres of land next year. They seem to have been used to it. When someone dies, and they take the opportunity to rent a few more acres of land at a high price. In this way, your family will have fewer hungry meals in the coming year. If placed in some prosperous times, some people would definitely accuse them of being cold-blooded, ruthless, and plotting against the dead, but at least they and their children survived. Under the scorching sun, some people are struggling for their own lives, some are trying to earn their lives for others, some are planning for winter, and some are planning for spring. In the church in Queen Village, Father Cloven is keeping a diary. He wants to record everything here. This was more than just fulfilling the Archbishop's orders. It was something he felt he had to do. Someone has to know what's going on here. It has not rained for 4 weeks, and the heat wave is making people breathless. Those who were affected by the disaster before have not received relief, and the officials and nobles here have not done anything substantial. People had to fetch water from wells that were about to dry up, and some livestock were already sick. If those lives are not saved, I'm afraid that their owners will not be able to repay the land rent in the coming year. On one side are the farmers' withered crops, on the other side are the green pastures of the landlord's family. There is no shortage of water here, but farmers lack canals. What he didn't know was that even in villages with canals, landowners would cut off the canals leading to farmland for the sake of their own cattle and sheep. Vienna, Royal Military Academy. Several international students from Switzerland have become so stupid that professors express their inability to do anything. Pastor Billet is a clergyman who knows nothing about military command, as the professors had expected. But as one of the top commanders of the Swiss army, General Ulrich Salas did not even know the most basic common sense of marching and fighting. This is simply incredible point, especially in this era. He actually knew nothing about the application of artillery, and his tactical thinking was still stuck in the American Revolutionary War. Letting these people lead the troops in a war will undoubtedly result in the entire army being annihilated, or simply being defeated without a fight. The professor's evaluation is that it's not impossible for them to rush the ducks, to put it on the shelf. But the final result will be very uncertain. At the same time, the Austrian Empire and General Duffer have very beautiful records, have received many awards, and are indeed good at mountain warfare. At the same time, he also has rich combat experience. Even if he is placed in an army such as the French army or the Austrian army, he can still be regarded as an excellent commander. Of course, this man was not invincible. At this time, Austria was not the poor and weak Austria-Hungary that it would be later, and there were still some generals with strong military virtues. It's just that these people are not suitable to go to Switzerland to command operations, because once these senior generals are involved, it will violate Austria's original intention not to directly participate. There is indeed a commander who is capable and experienced and does not belong to the Austrian military. Vienna, a Brecht Palace. Grandpa Carol, I would like to invite you to Switzerland for a vacation. Archduke Carol held his forehead. Franz, have you confused John and me? I don't like mountain climbing, and I don't like snow either, but you like fighting, or you're good at it. Franz's words were very abrupt, which made Archduke Carol frown. What do you mean? It makes me look like a war maniac. There may be a war in Switzerland in the future, and it will be a very disparate war, and the Austrian Empire will not send a single soldier to it. But other countries may not do this, and the local people's will to fight is not firm. I need you to hold on as long as possible to give the Austrian Empire an excuse to intervene. In fact, after the news of a possible civil war in Switzerland came out, Austria increased its intelligence collection efforts on it. But judging from the known intelligence and all aspects of the situation, the independent alliance's winning rate is almost 0. The alliance is too loose and has no stable economic source, let alone unified coordination and command. People were overly optimistic about the prospects of war, thinking that relying on the intervention of the great powers would allow them to achieve independent status, rather than unify Switzerland. They want to separate. Moreover, judging from the situation between ourselves and the enemy, the Orthodox Alliance, the new name of the Independent Alliance, is also at a disadvantage. The fall of Fribourg state is almost inevitable. The only problem is the length of time. Historically, the canton of Fribourg only held out for 3 hours before surrendering to Duffer's army. The personnel, terrain, and international situation were all at a disadvantage. Only then did Franz understand why Metternich had to stop the war between the two sides. If the two sides start a war, I'm afraid that the war will be over before the Austrian army arrives in Switzerland. Austria could send troops to Tyrol, but crossing the Alps was not an easy task. Chapter 407 Veteran. Traveling 3,000 miles all alone, one sword once served as the division of millions. Archduke Carol accepted Franz's suggestion, and he also felt that this was his last chance. Historically, Archduke Charles is best known as the strongest of Napoleon's recognized opponents, but he doesn't like the label of loser at all. If possible, Archduke Carol still hopes to prove himself on the battlefield. Franz talked about the dilemma of the Swiss Orthodox Union, and also explained the difficulty of Austria not being able to directly send troops. This is undoubtedly a challenge, but at the age of 72, it is a pleasure to become a challenger again. However, Archduke Carol still had another worry at this time, which was that he was worried about his silly daughter standing by the window. And it's not like he's going to Switzerland for retirement. Taking this little princess with him may cause a lot of unnecessary trouble. Franz also noticed the worry on Archduke Carol's face and followed his line of sight. A figure shrank down, revealing half of his ponytail. Franz and Archduke Carol raised their foreheads at the same time. How could a military family raise such a thing? I will help take care of my little aunt. Okay, deal. Archduke Carol replied readily. Franz's head was full of black lines, and he couldn't help but complain in his heart. Is the difficult to discipline daughter the key point? Uncle Carol seemed relieved, but Franz still had to act more responsible. Don't worry, I will, Franz. was interrupted by Archduke Karol before he finished speaking. "Oh, by the way, if you can, find a good family for her to marry. It doesn't matter if you marry a noble or a commoner, as long as she's not a loser and can take care of her." Franz nodded. "Franz, if you have nothing else to do, go back first. I still need to pack my luggage." "Pack your bags?" Franz asked with some confusion. "Yes, going to Switzerland." Archduke Karol returned to his usual appearance, speaking cleanly. "You are too impatient. With Austria and the Holy Alliance suppressing us, they will not be able to overturn the situation within a few years. Unless one pole collapses, or they receive strong support from other parties, there will be no change. To be honest, Franz really doesn't know when the Swiss Free Alliance will take action, but judging from the intelligence, the Holy Alliance and France put too much pressure on them, even causing some states to waver, and with the help of the church maybe there will be a turn for the better, but Franz himself must be fully prepared. Let's explore the terrain first. Are you going to let me fight with the map? Archduke Karol obviously had his own plans, but you don't have to go there yourself. You can find some trustworthy people. Archduke Karol shook his head. Switzerland is mountainous, and the most important thing in mountain warfare is familiarity with the environment. Don't you always like to say, a good fighter can hide thousands of troops invisible point, and there is another sentence in The Art of War that you gave me. Those who are invincible must defend. Those who are victorious must attack. If the defense is insufficient, there will be more than enough to attack. Those who are good at defending are hidden under the 9 places. Those who are good at attacking are those who are good at attacking. It moves above the 9 heavens, so it can protect itself and achieve complete victory. Point. He's right. Franz knew that it was useless and unnecessary to persuade him, so he got into the carriage and left. Before leaving, she brought some small toys and food to Karolina. Although her family was the richest aristocratic family in Austria, she had never seen some things that spanned generations and continents. "Franz, you are so funny. Where did you get all these things?" Karolina always felt that she had everything at home, but Franz always got some novel things that she had never seen before, and both in terms of personality and appearance, she is better than her 3 brothers. It seems from the book. Aunt Karolina, you can do more reading. You are so awesome. I can't do it. My head hurts when I read a book. When will you come back? Otherwise, I will go find you. Girls of Karolina's age are full of curiosity about boys. However, her father and brothers at home protected her so well that she had little contact with women of her own age. Not entirely. There was always a thin little boy beside her, always staring at Franz fiercely, as if looking at a love rival. "I will come often in the future," Franz said. "Really?" Karolina said slightly excitedly. "Well, Uncle Karl has entrusted your studies to me, and I will often come to supervise your studies in the future." "Ah, don't want it? I'll tell my father." Franz grabbed Karolina's arm and said, "Uncle Karl is going on a trip, so don't distract him." Karolina and Franz looked at each other, and when she saw the other person staring at her, she felt her face was so hot, and then she lowered her head and whispered, "But then, I'll come back after a while." But Franz had already climbed into the carriage, while Karolina still stood there blankly. "Ah, he held my hand. But why didn't he put a ring on me?" In the carriage, Franz did not regret what he had done. Archduke Karol, his personal ability and experience are definitely not inferior to any active commander in Austria. It's just that it's almost impossible for him to lead troops again in Austria, and sending him to Switzerland doesn't count as burying his talent. If Archduke Karol can win, he will be honored and become a legend, and the story may be passed down to future generations. But even if it can't, it doesn't matter, because Archduke Karol is already 72 years old. Whether he is defeated and dies in battle or accidentally dies, it can be an excuse for the Austrian Empire to send troops. This approach can be said to be very cruel, but it is not heartless, and it is efficient and reasonable. Of course, Franz knew Archduke Karol relatively well, and he could not imagine the scene of the old man's defeat. What Franz has to do now is to make this empire stronger. After all, only the strong can possess the luxury of peace. Zenla Phnom Penh. The third child of Ambrosius and Queen Anne-Marie was born, a boy who would inherit the throne of Chenla in the future. The birth of an heir is something worth celebrating, but the powerful families in the Chenla region don't think so. The church's power has developed rapidly in the Chenla area, already controlling 70% of the land and 80% of the population, and accounting for more than 95% of the economy. The power of the clan was weakening, and slaves and subjects often even fled to areas controlled by the church. If things go on like this, they may disappear from the world. In fact, generally speaking, religion and nobility are allies, but the church in the Chenla area is actually controlled by Franz. Their goal is to completely control the country. Naturally, they will not make peace with those local forces. On the contrary, they will divide and disintegrate their power. After all, these so-called clans are obstacles to national unity and centralization. It is good if they are willing to accept transformation. If not, then they can only be sent into the dust of history. Chapter 408 Pilot Education. 6 years of experience in pilot education. Imperial told Franz that, in order to solve education problems, we must first solve economic problems, with the focus being on the food and clothing problems of ordinary people. In fact, the vast majority of people in Innsbruck do not have to worry about not having enough food to eat, but human beings are always indolent, and there are always people who want to get something for nothing. Moreover, such people often have loud voices, making it easy for people to mistakenly think that they are the mainstream. The best way to deal with such people is to deal with them strictly and quickly, otherwise things will become difficult to deal with once they gather a crowd. After long-term practice, churches and teachers have discovered that providing free food does more harm than good. Cases of corruption and embezzlement emerged one after another, and there was even a case where 14 children in a school ate 25 tons of bread in 1 month. In other words, a student eats 1.78 tons of bread a month. Even if there were no days off, he would eat 2 meals a day at school, and each meal would require him to eat 60 kilograms of bread, which was almost the same weight as a child at that time. It is not advisable to limit the amount of meals to a fixed amount. Students of the same height and weight may have different appetites. One may be too hungry to walk, while the other may be too hungry. The so-called moderate adjustment, that is, adding more meals to students who can eat better, is also not advisable, because this involves the issue of fairness, and judging from a large amount of feedback, workers at the bottom responsible for basic education generally feel that compulsory education for all is a waste of the country's limited resources. As a descendant, of course I know that the views of this group of people are wrong, but it is imperative to select them purposefully, based on the background of the times and the special national conditions of the Austrian Empire. First of all, in order to popularize education and promote German as much as possible, 4 years of compulsory education in primary school is necessary. At the same time, in order to increase the quality of the population and select talents, the reward and punishment mechanism must be strengthened in the 4 years of secondary school, with a combination of elimination and selection of the best. How should I do it? Send money. Yes, it is the most undesirable approach according to economists in all primary schools in the Austrian Empire, excluding rest days and holidays. The total number of school days in a year is 186 days. 1 florin in cash and 1 florin in banknotes were subsidized every 30 days, so that a child would receive 12 florins a year. The expected banknotes cannot be used and exchanged temporarily. You need to wait for the child to complete 4 years of school before they can be redeemed. The expected banknotes of 24 florins in 4 years are still not willing to give up this kind of income for an ordinary family. In this way, it can ensure that as many children as possible can complete primary school, and can also reduce the occurrence of troubles between children and parents. It can also reduce sexism and racial discrimination. After all, it is profitable, not shabby. As for the so-called last place elimination and merit-based selection in middle schools, to put it simply, outstanding students not only have free tuition, but also receive bonuses, while second-class students are charged a small amount of nominal tuition to retain their potential for a bright future. Chance. Ordinary students need to pay normal tuition, and some need to pay extra. As for those who are really poor, they must pay high tuition fees or leave on their own. After all, the country's resources are limited. The advantage of this approach is that poor students can be used to subsidize excellent students and the normal operation of the school, but this method is only applicable to middle schools. It is too cruel for primary school students, and is not conducive to social peace and national integration. As for Austrian universities, they have always engaged in elite education. The purpose is to select the best from the best, and face the future, the market and society, rather than to cultivate a group of problem solvers. Universities have special student aid plans and student aid contracts, and the parts that do not belong to basic education will not be discussed for the time being. The wool must always come from the sheep. The country has so many resources, but things still have to be done. At this time, it is the rich people who need to contribute. In addition, the Royal College for Women also has more new students than in previous years. This is a good sign. First, it proves that people have changed their understanding of the importance of education. Second, Austrians are getting richer and richer. It is also a good thing for the country to be strong in the people, to be prosperous at this time. Austria's economy is much stronger than it has been historically, so it can take slightly bigger steps. However, the areas for basic education are still Netolinia and Chenla, and education in Africa and Translatania will still have to be put on hold for the time being. Of course, there are exceptions. For example, in royal estates in Hungary and royal territories such as Vojvodina and Belgrade, basic education should still be started as soon as possible. In addition, several of the most prosperous cities in Austria have launched German, Austrian, adult education, mainly to facilitate immigrants and migrant workers. At the same time, the Flemish refugees who were willing to move to Austria played a great role in promoting Austria's overseas colonial career. Although most of them are farmers or fishermen, their adventurous spirit is much stronger than the Austrians who originally lived in the interior. In particular, people are very interested in becoming farmers in Africa and Central America. People are willing and need relevant national policy support. Franz naturally would not miss this opportunity. He still had autonomy over Austria's overseas colonies. After all, Franz was equivalent to the colonial minister at this time, and he was also the largest shareholder and CEO of the Austrian Royal Overseas Development Company. As a result, an Austrian version of the Homestead Law was born. Of course, it is still a measure to benefit the people in name. As long as you participate in overseas development, you can obtain shares. The more land and mines you develop, the more shares and dividends you will receive. Although this is a naked empty-handed wolf in the eyes of capitalists, it is still very attractive to ordinary people, especially those from Flemish who grew up listening to the legend of the East India Company. Because Austrian shipping is booming again, even the Navy has established a transportation company to receive some private goods to solve its own funding problem. This is understandable, because the Navy is too expensive and the Austrian army is too large, so it is impossible to allocate too much money to the Navy. Friedrich's family is rich, but the annual investment of tens of millions is really too much. Moreover, the Austrian Navy has no tradition of robberies, and of course there is no place to rob, otherwise it can slightly alleviate the predicament at this time. Another benefit of the Navy's maritime transportation is to prevent the maritime industry from overheating. Because capital is always blind, those businessmen will do anything to make money. For example, hiring foreign ships, even selling orders to foreigners, or directly purchasing scrapped ships from abroad for shipping. What they hid so casually was Austria's own shipbuilding industry, and Austria's shipbuilding industry was originally relatively backward and relatively small in scale. If it suffered another blow, it would probably be farther and farther away from other major powers. At the same time, those who want to make quick money don't care about safety at all. Overloading and illegal operations are almost inevitable. And once their outrageous behavior comes to light, the Austrian shipbuilding and shipping industries will ultimately foot the bill. This is a disguised form of capitalizing on the enemy. Chapter 409. A few little things. In fact, there were many interesting things in 1843. For example, there was a farmer in the United States named William Miller, who claimed to be a scholar who spent his life studying the Bible, and came to a terrible conclusion. God will choose a time to destroy the world. He claimed that the world would disappear at some point between March 21, 1843, and March 21, 1844. Almost no one believed this nonsense at first, but with the arrival of late potato blight and flooding, many people believed his words. Even the infamous Doomsday Ark Society found him and tried to join forces with him to save the world. William Miller received the support of some booksellers and insurance companies, published his remarks in books, and distributed them everywhere. In just a few months, he developed tens of thousands of believers. These people believed that the end of the world was just around the corner, so they began to spend their money wantonly. Franz naturally would not miss this opportunity. He sent someone to take over these properties and promised those who wanted to get their property back one day, they would only need to pay an additional 20% handling fee. Other businessmen who were preparing to take over the property of these believers resented the people sent by Franz, and they even planned to hire gangsters to snatch back the property that belonged to them. However, these unscrupulous businessmen obviously underestimated their opponents. The dozens of gunmen they found were easily defeated, and even they themselves were quickly found. After some friendly exchanges, the businessmen admitted that the so-called Doomsday was nothing more than a hoax. William Miller is just a scapegoat. He does believe in his theory, but his influence is not great. The reason for today's situation is of course the result of businessmen adding fuel to the flames. Franz did not continue to make things difficult for those businessmen. After asking for a hush money, he watched the farce continue. Without the help of those businessmen, William Miller could not handle the believers at all, and the people sent by Franz kept irritating him with words such as liar. In the end, the prophet predicted that the world would be destroyed on April 23, 1843. However, on that day, the world was still running as usual. The sober believers found that they had become paupers with nothing. The angry crowd cut the false prophet into pieces. After the block, I hugged my head and cried. At this time, the man sent by Franz appeared again, saying that the contract was still valid. But these people had believed in the prophecies of the end of the world before, and had not thought about the future at all. Naturally, it was impossible for them to get the money now. Franz actually didn't want to make things difficult for these poor people, but they had to pay the price for their mistakes. Franz would lease their properties to them and then require them to repay certain fees periodically, eventually redeeming those properties. Of course, Franz would not let these properties be buried in the United States. While renting them to them, he would also mortgage these properties to banks in exchange for loans. Those who made mistakes are atoning for their sins. The bank clerks have gained their achievements. William Miller has achieved his doomsday, and the Austrian Empire has made money. Only Franz hides his merits and fame. 1836. Guangzhou. A child student who had failed many attempts accidentally got a copy of the Palm of the Tathagata. Oh no, it was good words to encourage the world, which seemed like nothing at the time. After all, it is just a popular book that the Catholic Church hired someone to write in order to open up the market. In 1843, Han Ringkun, who was already in his 30s, failed the Imperial examination again. He decided to bid farewell to the Imperial examination and follow a path of combining Chinese and Western medicine. At that time, China was in turmoil, with foreign powers outside and bandits inside. Since the Jiaxu year of Jiaqing, peasant uprisings have never stopped. A good year brings little peace, but a poor year brings prosperity. However, Han Ringkun felt passionate. He knew that times make heroes. At that time, when the world was still in chaos, Han Ringkun read this good words to encourage the world. He wondered if this was God's will, just like when the great master Zhang Jiao accidentally picked up the art of peace while collecting herbs in the mountains. Then Han Ringkun began his missionary journey. Master Han first invented the three major precepts, namely not to worship evil gods, not to do evil things, and to abide by the laws of heaven. Another prayer was invented: wash away sins, put away the old, and make a new one. Later, it evolved into a simpler and more direct version: kill the demons, and go to heaven. With Han Ringkun's unremitting efforts, everyone in his village finally thought he was crazy. However, Master Han eventually developed two of his followers, one named Han Rengan and the other Feng Yunshan, who later became the mainstay of the Dapping Heavenly Kingdom. In 1842, the first 50 volumes of Heiguo2Zhi were published. The author Wen Yuan loudly declared that those who want to control foreign barbarians must first understand the feelings of barbarians. Those who want to know the feelings of barbarians must first establish translators and translate barbarian books, and proposed, learn from the barbarians, and develop skills to control the barbarians. However, this book did not have much impact in the Qing dynasty. Instead, after traveling across the ocean to Japan, it was immediately regarded as a guide by local sinologists. Even one of the main purposes of Takasugi Shinsuke's eastward journey was to find the One Piece, Ano, the complete Heigo Tsuki, which in his own words, was called for the purpose of rejuvenating the country. The barbarians have 3 strong skills. The first is battleships, the second is firearms, and the third is how to raise and train troops. His thoughts influenced Japan for nearly 100 years. However, it would still be 8 years before the Heiji Uo-2Zhi was transmitted, and history had already changed. Japan, Nagasaki. The Japanese are indeed good at learning and imitating, but this time they picked the wrong target. Politicians who advocated harmony of souls and talents chose the Qing dynasty, and Japan also began to isolate itself. After more than 200 years of seclusion, Nagasaki was Japan's only window to the outside world, and the only contacts it had were the Netherlands and the Qing dynasty. Of course, like the Azinjiro family, the Tokugawa shogunate was not completely closed-minded. At least the top officials knew a lot about the world. In fact, closing the country is just part of the policy of obscuring the people, and the purpose is to eliminate the will of the domestic people. To resist. The shogunate stipulated that merchants entering Hong Kong from Nagasaki must report overseas news to the Nagasaki governor, who was in charge of foreign trade affairs. The official position was a kind of official position in Japan at that time, such as the insect official, the temple official, the designated official, the town official, and the distant country official. This official position can be large or small, and it is a temporary service. According to different sources of information, it is divided into Tangfeng storytelling and Lanfeng storytelling. In addition, there is also Bifeng storytelling compiled by translators, based on the dictation of foreign businessmen or excerpts of news from foreign newspapers. 2 wars broke out in Asia and Europe. Rumors about these 2 wars rained down like raindrops, which shocked the shogunate authorities. Tadakuni Mizuno, a veteran of the Tokugawa shogunate, immediately held an intermission meeting to discuss Japan's survival. Leozhang was regarded as the highest official position in the shogunate at this time, and he was an official directly under the general Zengai, who was responsible for directing national government affairs. At the same time, Japan also received 2 letters of credence, one from Russia and one from the United Kingdom, with only one purpose: requesting the shogunate to open trade. Chapter 410 Manifest Destiny. Inspired by the so-called Manifest Destiny, Americans in the 19th century felt they were omnipotent, and even after the disastrous defeat in Texas, some of them still did not change their minds. However, with the rise of Mexico, America's westward path was forced to turn west to the Pacific coast. At this time, the number of immigrants from the United States and Oregon was far greater than at the same time in history. The British colonists there could only hide in their own fortresses and try to avoid conflicts with the former. As for the local Indians, they were not so lucky. They experienced the simple folk customs of the Americans' deportation and extermination package vividly. These ambitious adventurers naturally understood the principle of courtesy before fighting. They first signed an agreement with the Indian tribes and promised not to invade each other. Then when the number of immigrants was sufficient, they began to show their fangs. They united the big tribes, first dealt with the small tribes, and then divided and disintegrated, until they were all eliminated. This approach works every time, and the entire process runs in one go, like a sophisticated machine. This is the legendary Manifest Destiny, specifically the following 3 points. Superiority, the American sense of racial and institutional superiority, that is, the belief that the Anglo-Saxon race in this land is independent and inherently superior, and destined to bring good government, prosperous commerce, and church to the American continent and the world. On the other hand, it was the rationalization of the enslavement of black people and the extermination of Indians mission, reconstruct the world in American ways, and from American perspectives God's will, destiny. Of course, if they were just moved to reservations, the fate of these Oregon natives might not be so tragic. They were ambushed on the Oregon Trail. The person who took action was none other than the Continental Army militia of the US Army. The reasoning was that a ridiculous gathering of Indians might rob a caravan, and then these guys who were supposed to be responsible for the defense carried out justice. The Chaos War, which was supposed to happen in 1848, seemed to break out ahead of schedule due to the large influx of Americans into Oregon, which aggravated the conflicts between the two sides. Naturally, the local Indians could not be the former's opponents. In the early days of the war, the US military was indeed unstoppable, but soon they encountered unexpected situations. The Indians on the opposite side suddenly had a lot of muskets in their hands, and they started guerrilla attacks, specifically attacking lone Americans and farmers in remote areas. This made the American officers and soldiers very angry. Soon they figured out the source of the British equipment, but even Washington was unable to do anything about it. Because every time his ambassador in London approached the British to protest, the answer he received was always, "The guns are made by us in the UK, but the smugglers are you Americans, just like you secretly invaded the Oregon area of Canada's colonial territory and were its. Like a dog comes to its owner to protest after a bite." Naturally, such a tough reply would not come from Robert Peel, because he was more inclined to peacefully solve the Oregon problem. But at this time, due to changes in history, Palmerston, who should have stepped down and wandered around the European continent, found a position in the Tory party because of his flexible moral bottom line. At this time, it was this person who was responsible for solving the problem between the United States and Canada. Although he had many shortcomings, his ability as an excellent politician was undeniable. The comparison of the numbers of British and American people in the Oregon area made it impossible for the British to directly use force to expel them. Moreover, it is close to the Pacific Ocean, so it is unrealistic to mobilize troops or transport supplies from the mainland as soon as possible. The only people who could be exploited were the Indians in the area. Arming them doesn't cost much, but the effect is extraordinary, especially against the enthusiasm of American civilians. At least Palmerston himself thinks so. He felt that he could let the North American natives attack from all sides and disturb the peace of the local American immigrants. The latter will then face two choices, either to leave or to seek asylum. The most lacking thing in British North America and Canada was people, so of course it was very willing to accept this group of refugees. However, Palmerston was wrong. He still underestimated the degree of barbarism of Americans. Far from frightening American immigrants, the Chaos War, Indian raids, united them as never before. Yes, the result of the Chaos War was that the latter established a large number of militia organizations in the Oregon region, which gave Palmerston even more headaches. The most fundamental reason is that Britain's own power in that land is too weak, but it is not his nature to give up easily. Otherwise, he will live up to his reputation as the biggest troublemaker in the 19th century. Palmerston soon found a breakthrough, a group of people who were dissatisfied with the United States and wanted to create immortal achievements on the North American continent. Among them was a rancher named Cora Mombody, who had 150 cowboys and shot dead federally appointed peace officers, but the locals regard him as a hero, because it is precisely because of Mombody's existence that the white residents of the area are protected from bureaucratic exploitation and barbarian harassment. Moreover, this man was very pretentious and wanted to build a kingdom of his own. Naturally, Palmerston planned to add fuel to the fire and immediately expressed his support for his cause. With the support of the British, Cora Mombody's power developed rapidly, and he soon organized an army with a total number of more than 500 people. As we all know, a country is not a country as long as it has an army. These 500 unemployed people need a certain number of producers to support them, otherwise it will only be a matter of time before they starve to death. So Mombody began to expand. However, in this era and place of chaos and natural selection, a larger territory meant that more soldiers were needed to guard it, and the more soldiers they had, the more farmers they had to feed them. This vicious cycle turned Cora Mombody into a ravenous beast who continued to encroach on Oregon soil, and this vexing problem was thrown to John Taylor. This is a very dangerous multiple choice question. Sending troops to exterminate will waste people and money, and may provide an excuse for London and the Canadian authorities to intervene. B. To win over and divide. to win back Mumbai or divide his internal forces so as to achieve the purpose of turning big issues into small ones. C. Palliative treatment, lie down and let it develop. Unlike the intrigues in Oregon, California under Austrian rule was a completely different scene. After passing through the endless desert at the border, what comes into view is endless farmland. Today, California is not only self-sufficient, but can even export agricultural products to other regions. However, its main pillar industry is still gold mining, and the mines here are open day and night. A large amount of gold was sent to Mexico City and the Austrian Empire on the other side of the ocean. Of course, what was actually sent to the capital of the former, and in the end, a large part fell back into the pockets of the latter. Today's Mexicans seem to have basically become accustomed to being ruled by a development company from thousands of miles away. After all, even their center of power cannot do without the support of Austria. Not only Tazanana, but all the warlords in Mexico, including those civilian opinion leaders, began to pay attention to establishing good relations with Austria, hoping to gain its support. But now Franz is troubled, that is, there is too much gold dug out in California. Chapter 411 Insects. Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace. Franz was playing with a beautifully rounded blue gemstone, which is a moonstone. Locals believe that this stone can bring good luck, and even be a blessing from the moon god, awakening the power of people's past lives. Franz was curious about what it could bring to him. The person who gave this stone to Franz was the wealthy low-caste Indian businessman before. Vera Wise said that this stone was the eye of Brahma enshrined in the temple, and it seemed that he had indeed made a lot of money. South Asian subcontinent, Hyderabad. Since Baloch's last victory, he has received secret support from many feudal forces. Someone contributes money, someone contributes effort. But no high-level officials from the country have publicly expressed their stance, because they are all waiting for a result. If Baroque wins, then they will send troops to help liberate the Indian subcontinent. If Balochi lost, they would swarm him and his Sindhi state to pieces like hunting dogs. 20,000 British troops faced off against 50,000 rebels. To be honest, the Indian side had a great advantage in terms of military strength. And except for the insufficient number of artillery, other equipment is almost the same. At the same time, the enemy needs to cross the desert to attack Hyderabad, which is a laborious expedition. The Sindh army has a strong castle as a cover, and has to rest for a long time, so it has the advantage of waiting for work. However, the results were surprising. As soon as the battle began, King Kapil, who was responsible for defending the front, immediately got out of the way and joined the British army in attacking the remaining two kings. Baroch's three-sided encirclement and suppression plan suddenly turned into a flower in the middle of his own family. The British army directly divided the remaining rebels into two parts, and the Indians, who had lost their flank protection, were unable to organize a decent counterattack. What's even more frightening is that in order to increase their combat power, the resistance army recruited many untouchables to join the army. At this time, the cancer of the caste system that has existed in India for thousands of years broke out. Many untouchables threw down their weapons and surrendered to the enemy in droves because they did not know what it meant to defend their country. On the contrary, in the eyes of these low-class people, the other side is more merciful and kind than the local landlords. Frankly speaking, the degree of barbarism in the Indian subcontinent today exceeds the imagination of most modern people. Human burials, human sacrifices, eunuchs, clothing taxes, nose-piercing taxes, slavery, and cannibalism. Each of them is horrifying. To this day, some bad habits still persist in some parts of India. Therefore, for the poor people at the bottom, who are worse off than the squatters, there is no difference between their own master and the white foreign master. It is just a change of ruler, and this new master is more merciful and more fair. The battle involving tens of thousands of people ended with only 73 casualties from both sides combined. However, this time the British did not show their merciful side. Governor Earl Ellenborough ordered the execution of all the murderers of General Pena and his own officers and soldiers after capturing Hyderabad. The British army staged a massacre of the city. More than 20,000 people were killed. However, some rebel leaders with noble backgrounds such as Baroque escaped the liquidation. Of course, death penalty can be avoided, but living crime cannot be escaped. They can only spend the rest of their lives under the supervision of the British. But even this treatment was much luckier than that of the people at the bottom. The untouchables were first drafted into the battlefield and finally survived the war and then encountered the massacre. However, the local kings who came to take over the land also did not regard them as people look at it and wish that all these people were dead. Very Wise, who had made a fortune during the war, came to the governor's mansion with anxiety. After dotting 2 gold bars up and down, he successfully met Earl Ellenborough. Mr. Very Wise, what do you want from me, my Lord Governor? I'm a businessman. I brought some specialties from our hometown to visit you today. I hope you won't dislike it, Very Wise said cautiously. Earl Ellenborough poured a cup of coffee and sat in his chair very casually. He had seen many people who nodded and bowed. It's just that the people the businessmen offered bribes to were all those greedy people from the Port Authority. This was the first time that they came directly to bribe him. However, Ellenborough only regarded the Indian in front of him as an ordinary tobacco dealer who just wanted to sell his goods at a good price. After thinking briefly, he opened a box filled with neatly arranged gold bars. Suddenly, Earl Ellenborough was so shocked that he couldn't even hold the coffee cup and threw it to the ground. However, he seemed to be unaware of it, staring straight at the valuable gift in front of him. Your Majesty the Governor, Your Majesty the Governor, Very Wise called 3 times in a row before Ellenborough came back to his senses. The latter obviously realized that he had just lost his composure. Although he had long heard that India was a place full of gold, he still underestimated this so-called good reputation. Although he was born into a noble family and held a high position, he mainly relied on the support of his ancestors. Although he had risen through the ranks, he had not seen much of the world, so he was frightened by a box of gold. What do you want to do? It took Earl Ellenborough a while to hold back such embarrassing words. This was somewhat beyond Very Wise's expectations. He thought the British were all virtuous. My Lord Governor, I really want to make friends with you. But, no problem. Earl Ellenborough agreed, but as soon as he put his hand on the box, the other party spoke again. Sir, I'm a serious businessman. Unfortunately, the Navy men always suspect me of smuggling contraband. Ellenborough immediately understood the other party's intention. Don't worry, I will issue you a certificate solemnly declaring that you are working for the United Kingdom. From now on, you are a businessman of the British Empire, and no one can check you casually. With a stroke of his pen, he added the seal of the Governor General of India. This may not seem like much to him, but to an ordinary Indian, it is a dream come true. Of course, there was no need for such trouble in the past. In the past, as long as you bribed the staff of the East India Company and listed the ship in their name, you could avoid many troubles such as taxes and inspections. But in 1833, the trading privileges of the East India Company were revoked, and even those using its name would be investigated. That's why Very Wise went to the governor's mansion in person. After all, what he deals in is not just tobacco and soil, but also absolute contraband, weapons. It imports weapons and transports them to India to make huge profits. At first it was Austria, then the Chenla region, because it was close and would not affect Franz's layout. But what is ridiculous is that the British have a local arsenal in India, and the output is not low. Although the Battle of Hyderabad failed, the businessman escaped sanctions, so more weapons poured into other princely states armed with a sharp weapon. The murderous intention arouses itself. The South Asian subcontinent has become more unstable, which is a good thing for the Sikh Empire in the north and the newly restored Afghanistan. In fact, Russia further north also wanted to get involved, but it was unable to break through the grasslands and deserts of Central Asia. The 3 countries of Bukhara, Vastu, and Khivar are like a natural chasm, lying between Russia and the rich South Asian subcontinent. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 412. Every family has a difficult scripture to recite. Ireland, a noble manor in the south. A female rider energetically drove a tall white horse galloping through the racecourse, but both she and the white mare felt that the world inside the fence was too small. The female rider grabbed the reins and clamped the horse's belly hard. The horse jumped over the fence and galloped on the forest road. The June wind 1843, blow on her face, making her feel a little refreshed. The crooked houses on both sides of the road were her neighbors, which made her face flash with disgust. With her thin lips, high nose, and naturally cold and arrogant temperament, the female rider truly felt that she was God's most perfect creation. She was thinking about meeting him soon. The capable banker should also surprise her. After all, she did not hoard food or commodities, but purchased land. Yes, those damn Irish poor people's lands, although dirty, can definitely bring them a lot of income. As for my lovers, I should reward them, but not too much, lest they slack off, and I should give them a good whip at night. At this moment, a gunshot broke the silence, and interrupted the female rider's imagination. The horse was so frightened that it raised its front hooves high. But what it didn't know was that its owner had fallen down, and one hand was hanging limply. Because of the action just now, the woman's body fell from the horse to the ground, and rolled into the mud. The hostess, who was still aloof just now, was now a corpse rolling in the mud. The head was hit, and red, yellow, and black formed a strange painting on the woman's brand new white shirt. The killer blew on his gun, turned around and jumped into a hay wagon. This gun is good. The gunman only said this, and the other party did not answer. The driver drove the carriage, as if nothing had happened, leaving only 2 lines of unclear ruts on the path in the field. After several hours, people found the body of the female rider in the mud. Her horse, clothes, and belongings were gone, leaving only a body covered in mud. London, Downing Street. Robert Peel opened a letter, and glanced at it for a few times, before throwing it aside, putting his hands behind his head, and taking a long breath. But in fact his scalp is about to explode. In recent times, several important supporters of the Tory party have been assassinated. Initially, people suspected that this was a political assassination, because the first few victims were officials, but soon the victims were not just officials, but wealthy businessmen, large landowners, widows who inherited huge inheritances, etc. However, people soon discovered that this was a political assassination, because the deceased were all Tory supporters. Robert Peel has ordered several investigations into the matter, but the number of victims continues to increase, and the identity of the murderer remains unknown. Fortunately, the Queen did not ask about this matter, otherwise he really wouldn't know how to explain it. Robert Peel felt that these should be the fault of the Chartists. After all, the British government not only failed to meet their demands, but also sent troops to suppress the Chartist demonstrations. In fact, this is also a helpless move. At this time, the UK is in economic crisis. A large number of factories have already closed down. If wages are increased for workers, it may further affect the entire British economy. Although the root cause of this economic crisis is that they and the Whigs misjudged the situation and hoarded money, but the butt determines the head. Businessmen are with themselves, and the government must first protect their interests. As a result, the economic crisis was passed on to urban workers and rural farmers, both of whom suffered miserably. Then, they hired killers to attack dignitaries and wealthy people. What a despicable and crude group of people. Robert Peel lamented. We must leave them a bloody lesson, so that the class that has neither property nor reason understands the dangers of revolution. To be more precise, we must let them know what the price is. Robert Peel received a standing ovation in his impassioned speech in Parliament, and then returned home to mobilize 200 soldiers and 5 cannons to protect him. Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace. To be honest, Franz did not expect that the so-called Chartists could achieve this level. The Austrian side only supported a small amount of weapons and funds, and they were able to kill so many big figures in the British government without anyone noticing. Presumably the British top brass must be in chaos at this time, and everyone is in danger. Of course, this was not Franz's original intention. All he wanted was for Britain to be in a state of chaos at this time. He has more important things to do. Austria has accumulated too much gold. Once all is released, it may cause gold to depreciate and cause inflation. If it is normal inflation, it doesn't matter. I'm afraid that the inflation rate will be too high, and then people's hard-earned trust in the Austrian government will be gone. In fact, Franz has several options at this time. Pay off the debt. It might be a good option, to solve the debt problem that has plagued Austria for decades. People like to say debt-free, but debt-free is not a good thing for a company or a country. And if the debt of the Austrian Empire of nearly 2 billion florins is really paid off, countless millionaires can be created in minutes. But again, why should I pay back the money I borrowed, based on my ability, in comparison? Another seemingly outrageous choice seems much more reasonable at this time: reigning the troops means investing money in the military. Of course, the investment at this time was not the army, but the navy. Yes, Austria's navy and shipping are still too weak in this maritime era. As we all know, from ancient times to the present, no matter in any era, the navy has been a gold-eating beast. With the increase in trade with Africa, Central America, and Asia, the Austrian Empire did need more ships, and many big events required ships. Franz knew that he would not lose money by investing in this. Friedrich was also an upright man, but his subordinates may not be so. So Franz still needs to send some people to supervise him, but to be honest, there are not many people around him who can be used, especially in the political and economic aspects. As for the friends that the old emperor arranged for Franz, they were still a group of kids at this time, and even a few of them were adults and lacked experience. Moreover, this group of people are not talented in the world, but they have extremely special identities. If we really let them go out to take care of things, I'm afraid it will lead to another tragedy of amateurs commanding experts. In addition, the officialdom is too deep. Even if these people have the support of their ancestors, they may not be able to figure out the doorways, so Franz could only go to Baron Bruck. Because even though Baron Bruck had become the president of the Austrian Imperial Central Bank at this time, he just bought a carriage and still lived in the attic of the clock shop. As the saying goes, birds of a feather flock together, and people flock together. Franz felt that there must be someone around, such a person who could use him. Chapter 413 Throwing Coins. June 14th, 1843, night. Vienna, Lion's Pride Hotel. Solomon Rothschild was sitting on a lounge chair. The man who was once respectfully called His Majesty the King looked like a weather-beaten old man, struggling to even open his eyelids. Solomon has been buying up companies in Austria this year. At this time, Austria's economy was booming and making money was not difficult. But history is always cyclical, and people can trip over the same stone once or countless times. Smart people are always different from others. Most factory owners can only see immediate benefits or frantically expand production or improve technology to reduce costs. But Solomon felt that they were wrong. Instead of wasting money on improving technology and expanding production, it would be easier to maintain the scarcity of goods, and the advantage of doing this is that you won't waste money. After all, those technical investments may not necessarily pay off, but the financial innovation he made will definitely pay off. After all, if you master the relationship between supply and demand, you can form a price alliance and wait for the money. This is the benefit of monopoly. But Solomon missed one person, and that was Franz. Whenever he is about to succeed, or has already succeeded, royal capital will quickly enter the field. Then came the drastic changes in the entire industry. New technologies, new models, new subjects, and new results shattered the original framework into pieces, and established a very solid new system at an extremely fast speed. Also broken is Solomon's heart. He doesn't know what he has done wrong, and the royal family seems to be targeting him. This must be jealousy of talents. If they don't suppress themselves, those in power may not be able to feel at ease. Solomon comforted himself in this way, but many things were actually beyond his expectation, such as the war that should have happened, and another war that should not have happened. He advised his nephew not to buy it, but he bought it like crazy, and lost more than the nephew. But Solomon firmly believed that there was at least one thing that he would not be wrong about. At the same time, a young man with an extraordinary bearing stepped into the Grizzly Bear Hotel on Toon Street. Next to him was a lady holding a parasol, who was elegantly dressed and well dressed. The boss was a little stunned for a moment, not sure what the young man in front of him was going to do. "Hello, sir. How can I help you?" "Ah, you the owner of this hotel?" the young man asked politely. "Yes, sir. With all due respect, how much money can you make in a month? The economy is booming now, and you know Vienna is a place where land is at a premium. It's okay to earn 1000 florins a month, but after deducting various taxes, plus labor and other expenses, what's left will be only 200 or 300 florins. Although it was only their first meeting, the young man had an irresistible temperament, and the boss unknowingly said too much. The young man smiled, and the beautiful woman beside him also smiled. The two of them seemed to be used to it. The young man spoke again. I am willing to pay 1500 florins to rent your hotel for a month. We want to be the only guests here. The boss thought for a while, and said with great embarrassment, I'm afraid that won't work, sir. This hotel was passed down to me by my father, and I will continue to be in business. In fact, it is not unusual to book a hotel in this era, but this kind of family hotel rarely encounters this kind of thing. At least this boss has not encountered this kind of thing. The young man seemed to have known the boss's answer for a long time, and he continued unhurriedly, I want to buy your hotel for 20,000 florins. This was a bit unexpected for the hotel owner, and the price just met his expectations. A quarter of an hour later, the owner of the Grizzly Bear Inn was replaced. Saurus and his wife sat by the window on the second floor of the hotel and looked at the rapidly developing city. The noisy crowd who was driven out from downstairs did not disturb their interest. This city is good. I like it very much. It is full of vitality and business opportunities. Fiona smiled, very charming, and then said, it's a good choice as the last stop of the wedding trip. Do you mean the Flying Dutchman by the Big Opera? It's a very good work, but it seems that the Netherlands is better to appreciate this opera. After all, the author of this opera, Mr. Warner, is in Holland. Saurus smiled and shook his head. Mr. Warner is a great artist, but King William II of the Netherlands is a fool. Their performance is not worthy of our wedding trip. Oh, what is that? Fiona asked curiously. Her husband had a special kind of pride that only belonged to the Jews. She was convinced that the Jews were the smartest race in the world, far superior to other white people, and her husband was the smartest among them. The entire Austrian Empire is the stage, and the clown is the Habsburg royal family. This is a big play directed by me, Saurus said confidently, and he would not allow himself to fall into the same place twice. Although the previous 2 times were a win and a draw, they did not cause the opponent to feel any pain, which made him very dissatisfied. Especially after knowing that his opponent was just a child. Saurus became even more dissatisfied. How could those pig-like nobles compare with the noble Jews? In order to prevent this matter from becoming his inner demon in the future, Saurus must see the scandal of the country's breach of trust and collapse. In order to make his thoughts clear, yes, tomorrow is the first anniversary of the establishment of the Austrian Royal Overseas Development Company. Logically speaking, tomorrow should also be the day for dividends, but this company is different from any other company in the world. It has more than 4 million shareholders and may involve tens of millions of people. Seeing the speed of development of the Austrian colonies, Saurus knew that this country must have invested a lot of money. This is no problem from a business perspective. After all, the early stage of colonization requires massive investment, which is the consensus of the business community. But civilians don't understand this, and they don't want to understand it. Those people wanted real money and things, and colonial development at this time still required a lot of financial support. Unless the Austrian Imperial government was crazy, it would choose to pay dividends. Even if they bite the bullet and pay dividends, how much will they pay? There are 20 million shares and more than 4 million shareholders. If each share is only divided into 1 florin, then these shareholders will definitely be dissatisfied. If based on the normal 5% at this time, it should be 1.2 florins, but this does not help, because people's expectations for this company are too high. The higher the expectations, the greater the disappointment. At that time, it will not only be the credibility of the Habsburg family that will be affected. Maybe there will be another French Revolution, so Saurus needs a house in a civilian area. He didn't want to get involved in the infighting among these idiots. June 15, 1843. The Austrian Royal Overseas Development Company announced a dividend of 5 florins per share. Earnings per share were as high as 20.8%. Or 100% for those shareholders who initially placed their bets when the share price was 5 florins. Chapter 414 Inflation. A one-time dividend of 250 million florins was astonishingly large. Speculation abounds about how much money the Austrian Royal Overseas Development Company makes, or how profitable it actually is. In fact, the Austrian Royal Overseas Development Company makes a lot of money, but its investment is even more exaggerated. But fortunately the capital is substantial enough. In just 1 year, the Austrian Royal Overseas Development Company's investment costs reached 270 million florins. In addition, France spent a lot of money this time, and the total cost reached 520 million florin. This is equivalent to 3 years of Prussian financial expenditures, and the gains from the colonies seem not worth mentioning in comparison. At this time, Namibia, which has the best profit-making effect, only turns in profits of more than 10 million florins every year. The situation in the other 4 colonies is similar. In addition, the income of the Austrian domestic railway is only about 100 million florins. If France continued to spend money like this, he would start to go into debt by the 7th year. But no one knows what will happen to Austria, and what will happen to the world in 7 years. In fact, France had already begun to expand production capacity with the help of the Luxembourg crisis half a year ago. Hoping to reduce the impact of the shock, because he does not like to fight uncertain battles, the Austrian Royal Overseas Development Company's coin spending behavior has made more than 1/3 of the families in Austria feel what the imperial grace means, especially in the Natalina region. Almost half of the population has enjoyed this benefit. More than 4 million shareholders have benefited from this dividend. And the vast majority of them are civilians, small nobles, and small clerks, because most wealthy people have already cleared their positions and left when the crisis broke out. In a sense, this dividend has narrowed the gap between the rich and the poor in the Austrian Empire. The people's trust in the imperial government and the royal family has been further improved, and the people indeed feel happiness. But there are always 2 sides to things. Grisly veins popped up on Soros's forehead and he crushed the pencil in his hand. He didn't expect that the Austrian royal family would dare to share the dividends like this. My dear, are you okay? This Habsburg family is so courageous and trustworthy. They should be a good trading partner. We may be able to invest here. Fiona comforted her husband and gave the answer: make your own judgment. Filona Mercure is the only daughter of the Mercure family. Of 9 brothers and sisters, 3 died in infancy, 2 died of accidents and 4 died of revenge. The Mega family was one of the richest Jewish families in the United States at this time. It started in the banking industry and was also the largest shareholder of the American Northern Shipping Company. The shipping here is inland waterway shipping, not an airline. Fiona has been investing with her father since she was a child, and her vision is naturally extraordinary. But Soros snorted coldly and said in a cold tone, "This is just asking for death." Soros's expression and tone frightened Fiona. The latter knew that the former had always been a witty and graceful gentleman, but now he seemed like an angry gambler. Soros also woke up at this time and then smiled. That smile was like the spring breeze blowing, and the previous haze was completely invisible. Haha, this approach of the Austrian Empire is tantamount to drinking poison to quench thirst. My dear Fiona, are you planning to do business with a dead man in a daze? Fiona felt that she had seen it wrong. Soros was still the same Soros. So she said, drinking poison to quench thirst? My dear, you see the streets are full of people celebrating. People are taking their newly acquired money to spend in the shops, especially the shops under the royal family's name are already packed with people. There is no doubt that the money it will return to the hands of the royal family. How can you drink poison to quench your thirst? How? To make civilians more willing to spend money, and spend more money has always been the ultimate question studied by businessmen. In fact, after visiting a shopping mall in Vienna, Fiona knew that the country's business potential was almost infinite. The products are dazzling and complete in variety. People are willing to consume and believe that tomorrow will be better. Moreover, the royal family and the government have a great influence on the economy, and they have indeed coordinated and resolved many market conflicts. Fiona had never seen such an orderly and vibrant market, and she wanted to see the creator of it all with her own eyes. The recent generosity of the Austrian Empire is not just to issue dividends. They have repaid part of their debts. What will be the consequences of such a large amount of currency entering the market? Soros said slowly. Inflation? Fina immediately thought of this word in her mind, along with some bad things. Yes, it's inflation. Saurus said with certainty. The problem with the Austrian Empire now is that there is too much money, and you can see that these civilians have no sense of saving money at all, and the rich are also eager to spend all their money, because there are so many things that can be consumed in this country. Take a look. Those wagon wheels. Fina subconsciously looked at the wheels of the carriage, and found nothing wrong, so she looked at her husband doubtfully. Saurus smiled. My dear, of course you don't care about the wheels, but they are rubber pneumatic tires. In our country such a tire can buy a cow, and almost all private carriages on the streets of Vienna use these tire. Look at the box in the lady's hand again. Fina looked at it, and then her eyes widened. Camera. Why is it so small? This is really a magical country. Today I understand why Europeans always like to call us Americans hillbillies. Their technology is too advanced. Fina said with emotion, but the Austrian Empire doesn't have that many goods for people to consume. Saurus said seemingly casually, people suddenly have more money in their hands, but factories will not expand production, because this hot money is only temporary. Following the trend will lead to a surplus of products, which will lead to falling prices, reduced factory profits and ultimately an economic crisis. But if production is not expanded, people will not be able to buy things with money, which will lead to rising prices. Austria's currency is expected to depreciate, and by then the country will still be unable to escape the fate of economic crisis. So no matter what the Austrian government does, the country is doomed. After listening to Saurus's analysis, Fina also felt that it made sense, and that the Austrian Empire's use of an inconvertible currency such as expected banknotes was itself a hidden danger, coupled with the massive distribution of dividends and a series of operations to repay debts at this time. I'm afraid that no one can save this country. Fina could already imagine the banks collapsing in a run. What a pity for this beautiful city. Fina couldn't help but sigh. There is nothing to regret. I will turn New York into the most beautiful city in the world. Dedicated to you. Saurus smiled. Chapter 415 Dividends. Austria, Vienna. The whole city is like a huge market, and the streets and alleys are crowded with people. Lively and prosperous are not enough to describe the scene at this time, but on the other hand, the Austrians' heavy use of anticipatory banknotes made surrounding countries feel uneasy. Especially Saxony and Prussia. Since Austria joined the German customs union, their trade with them has been at a disadvantage. The deficit has been increasing, and precious metals have continued to flow out. Coupled with the fact that Austrians were using large amounts of anticipatory banknotes for payments at this time, they were afraid of what would happen if the system collapsed. The Austrian Empire intends to pass on the economic crisis to Germany and the Apennines. This view caused an uproar as soon as it was proposed, and it was the new Prussian finance minister Friedrich List who proposed this viewpoint. As a result, neighboring countries have sent ambassadors to seek explanations from Austria. It would be best if the expected banknotes in their hands could be exchanged for real gold and silver, because Austria has indeed made a lot of money from the German and Apennine countries over the years. Otherwise these countries would not agree to accept such things as expected banknotes. But now the Austrian Empire is openly giving money to the people. God knows what kind of chain reaction there will be. In addition, Austria has recently issued large orders to various countries, which has aggravated the uneasiness of surrounding countries. The exception is Russia. First, they received the news relatively late, and second, their financial system is at a very low level. Vienna, Lion's Pride Hotel. Solomon Rothschild said it with certainty. Now that the German states and the Apennine states have forced their way to Vienna, the expected banknotes in your hands will become waste paper if they are not exchanged. Then, what should we do? The Austrian bank won't exchange money for us, said an old man in luxurious clothes. Yes, the price on the black market has dropped to 80% now, and it is still falling. Your Majesty Solomon, please save us, a young gentleman said. In fact, because expected banknotes actually had purchasing power, the price on the black market was almost the same as normal minted coins. But some recent bad news has upset this balance, and the price of banknotes is expected to plummet. You should go shopping. place a massive order. After Solomon finished speaking, everyone present looked at each other and asked them to hoard goods again. This scene was familiar to everyone, but the result last time was not good at all. Mr. Solomon, what's the use of buying so many things? No matter what happens, we only have one mouth and one pair of hands. The old man said first. Yes, there are too many goods, and we can't even pay the warehousing fees. Solomon cleared his throat and continued. You have to think carefully. If you continue to sell the expected money now, the price will continue to plummet. Who can afford the combined expected money in your hands? At least you won't lose so much if you buy something, and if you want to buy it, buy some necessary items. Goods, such as grain and coal, can be used sooner or later. After the party, everyone left thoughtfully. Some of them planned to follow Solomon's advice and immediately buy some commodities such as grain, wood, and coal. Some people plan to find ways to convert their expected banknotes into gold and silver and leave the country to avoid the upcoming crisis. Of course, some people plan to wait for the crisis to break out and take advantage of the low land prices. Solomon returned to the room alone and let out a disdainful laugh. Because his goal has been achieved. No matter what these people do, they will aggravate the crisis as expected. The price of expected banknotes on the black market fell below 50% within a few days, and it continues to decline. All prices are rising, especially daily necessities, which are in short supply. Vienna, temporary headquarters of the German Customs Union. We demand that the Austrian Empire immediately exchange the expected banknotes in our hands. Otherwise, we will stop the supply of goods to Austria. Friedrich List stood up and said, right, support, agree. They are obviously a group of high-ranking officials, but they give people the impression of a quarreling shrew in a market. Baron Brook tapped his fingers on the table. He felt very awkward sitting in the swivel chair, so his expression was more serious than usual. These swivel chairs are new products from Austria, which can make people sit more comfortable and convenient. But for some more rigid people, this feeling of laziness is their enemy. This kind of moving chair makes them feel uncomfortable all over, and Baron Brook happens to be such a person. Ah, you all finished? As soon as Baron Brook spoke, the entire venue fell silent. On the one hand, this is the growing reputation of the Austrian Empire among the German states at this time, and on the other hand, it is also the reputation and majesty of Baron Brook himself. I said listen, as long as the expected exchange period is reached, banknotes with a face value of less than 100 florins can be exchanged in full. Banknotes with a face value of more than 100 florins and less than 1,000 florins can be exchanged in half. And banknotes with a face value of more than 1,000 florins can be exchanged in half. We only pay interest on the amount below 10,000 florins. Baron Brook, you can't do this. Before he could finish his words, he was interrupted by Baron Brook. This has nothing to do with me. Rules are rules. As long as you follow the rules, we will be allies. If anyone wants to break the rules or make a new one, you can give it a try. All the German states shut their mouths. To be honest, the Austrian Empire at this time was something they could not afford to offend. Whether it is economic or military means, few countries can resist sanctions at this time. It is no longer possible to invite this great god out of the customs union, because even the headquarters of the alliance has been moved to Vienna. Seeing that all the envoys from the participating countries had shut their mouths, Baron Brook sighed helplessly. It was just a joke. You can use the expected banknotes to exchange gold with our Austrian Empire. This year we will exchange 300 million florins. The proportion that each country can exchange is based on your trade with our Austrian Empire. Calculate. In fact, Baron Brook did not want to do this, but since his trip to North America, he has habitually given people a showdown at the beginning. And his reputation and Austria's strength at this time made ordinary countries dare not bargain with him. As for Prussia's Friedrich List, he was a man who wisely protected himself and did not want to be the leader. In fact, this time Austria suddenly let out blood, not just California's gold. There is another more important reason, which is to balance the trade surplus with surrounding countries. Due to the appearance of France, Austria has become an even weirder existence than in history. This country has Europe's top entertainment industry. Coupled with Franz's hard work, the industry is ahead of its time. Point at the same time, this country is also an agricultural power in Central Europe, which means that it is not only self-sufficient, but also sucks blood from surrounding countries. Chapter 469 Deozu. Trade surplus is the pursuit of many countries, but bigger is not always better. The most direct impact is that it will lead to the deterioration of international relations. That's right, all the money has been taken away by one party. What about the other countries in the alliance? This is not a good thing for Austria, so Franz wants to take this opportunity to balance the balance of payments and spread inflationary pressure throughout Central Europe. Point in this way, the inflationary pressure will be much smaller. If Austria is the only country to bear it, it will be a very terrible situation. Point in fact, for most of the 19th century, countries were in a state of deflation. Point however, Austria's expected banknotes have alleviated this situation to a certain extent. At this time, the spread of inflation to surrounding countries has also promoted the prosperity of the entire Central European economy. Point. While representatives from various countries were chatting happily in the temporary headquarters in Vienna, the price of expected banknotes on the black market had fallen below 0.4. But this is nothing to ordinary Austrians. They will not sell their hard-earned money at a discount, and they do not know that the black market exists. The slight increase in commodity prices was not obvious, and as goods from the German states entered the Austrian market, prices soon returned to their original state. Those hoarders can't stand it any longer. Civilians enjoyed the welfare of the country and the glory of previous victories. The Luxembourg crisis, but they did not know what was happening. Point. The doomsday predicted by the rich did not come, and trade between Austria and other states continued. Point. However, many bankers lined up to jump into the Danube River, which benefited the ferocious freshwater fish in the Danube River. There are actually many ferocious freshwater fish in the Danube River, such as the salmon, also known as the king of the sea. It is fast, has many teeth, and has a ferocious temperament. However, there are few records of hurting people, mainly because this fish likes to wander in deep water areas. Little interaction with humans. Moreover, people usually see the salmon on the dining table. Because it grows quickly and has delicious meat, it is eaten as a protected animal. Point. With such a commotion, within the next 5 years, there will be almost no pressure on the exchange of expected banknotes. Because the largest buyer of prospective banknotes in the black market is Franz Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace. Point. The Franz family was having a dinner together, and the main course was a 4-meter long salmon. Point. In order to cook this fish, a total of 3 chefs were employed. 5 kilograms of various spices were used, and a specially built pot was used. Point. A fish weighing more than 100 kilograms cannot be eaten by Franz's family alone. As a result, everyone who saw it took part, and the chef, maid in charge of cooking, and the guard on duty all praised the taste of the fish. Point. Franz also took a bite, and it tasted really delicious at the same time. The Lion King's Pride Hotel. Point. Solomon looked at the sky in confusion and let out a sigh of relief. Vienna has always been so noisy recently. The famous music played by wandering entertainers is so harsh, and the happy people in the streets and alleys seem to be laughing at him. Point. Looking at the golden prawns fried in front of him, Solomon had no appetite at all. Why? This country has not fallen yet. Turned street. Grizzly in. Point. Saurus only drank some water, and his face looked very bad. Jane Finer even thought he was sick, but Saurus just waved his hand. We didn't get nothing this time. At least we bought this hotel. I think the price of this hotel will double in a few years. Fana didn't know how to persuade her husband, who refused to admit defeat, so she could only nodded. To be honest, tens of thousands of florins won't affect them much, but it is indeed a missed opportunity. Point. If I had been able to buy at the bottom, when I expected the currency to hit the bottom, I would have made a lot of money. Point. There was no smoke in this battle, and few people even knew about it, but its brutality was no less brutal than any previous war in which the Austrian Empire had participated. Point. In fact, this is also a screening point. Those nobles and wealthy people who were not optimistic about Austria once again transferred their money to die-hard element of the empire. Point. The transfer of social wealth is inevitably accompanied by changes in social atmosphere, and nationalism is on the rise again. They feel that the best way To unite the German nation is to let Austria unify Germany. The secret police is the most criticized aspect of Austria, but in the eyes of nationalists it has become a necessary means to maintain justice and order. Other countries simply do not have enough power, let alone capabilities. Because other countries were simply unable to protect the German Confederation, let alone create a country where all Germans would feel safe and happy. As a national economist, Bumbork knew far more than ordinary people. Although he didn't know the full content, he knew that the royal family was still protecting Austria this time. Nationalists have used all kinds of praise for Austria and the Habsburg family, but both Metternich and Franz are very wary of them, and they still need to be caught and dealt with. The nobles strongly demanded the restoration of the Holy Roman Empire. They missed the glory of the past, the days when they were dominant, and believed that the Habsburg family could once again complete this mission. The Austrian aristocracy has always been tied to the Habsburg family. They naturally hope that the royal family will be as powerful as possible. This will not only block the challenges of the emerging bourgeoisie, but also allow them to get a share of the pie. Then, due to the special environment in Austria, progressive nationalists and aristocrats who wanted to reverse course united together. Vienna, Royal Academy for Women. The library is large, but there are not many people there. Oshio Sujuna may have been the first Japanese woman to complete her studies at a Western university, but she still failed Franz's assessment. Failure means that she is not qualified to stay by Franz's side, which is really a pity for Oshiyasa Jin. If anyone else in the world said she was unqualified, she would definitely be unconvinced, but only Franz convinced Oshiyasa Jin. But she is not completely useless. Franz plans to give Oshio Shanain a task. Conquer Japan. This may not be a big deal to Franz. It may just be that he has no time or no interest. Oshio Shanain thought this way, and she felt that this was her fate. The flame of revenge has never been extinguished in her chest, preferring destruction to saving her. Yamato Nadeshiko's usual behavior is just to cater to Franz's preferences. Oshio Shanain still remembers the miserable conditions of the villagers. They were beaten to death with iron cannons, stabbed to death with spears, beheaded, and locked in houses, and burned alive. Those images and sounds were still clear even after so many years, and she could even call those people's names, but it doesn't matter anymore. Oshiyasa Jin just wants to complete her mission at this moment, and she can use all means to do so, even if it means sacrificing herself. However, Franz said that the time has not come yet, and before that she would continue to prepare for the conquest of Japan. Chapter 417 Brothers in Suffering. At this time, Austria's influence in Central Europe was continuing to expand. Although its rise did not involve much use of force, it was not even appropriate to call it a rise. It should be called a recovery point, but at this time, Britain and France still regarded it as a thorn in their side. In fact, no country that wanted to dominate would allow a force across Central Europe to emerge. However, Britain and France did not seem to have much energy to deal with Austria at this time. Robert Peel was troubled by the chaos caused by the Chartists in England, but there was something even more troublesome for him at this time. According to the intelligence, someone is trying to harm Her Majesty Queen Victoria. And it's not just one party. No one knows exactly how many assassins have infiltrated the UK. The Secret Bureau has deployed all its manpower, but the situation still has not improved. At this time, there was also unrest on the European continent. France's successive foreign campaigns and its huge investment in developing colonies had made its citizens miserable. The French court at this time was known for its conservatism, dullness, simplicity, and middle-class values. This was mainly because King Louis Philippe had never emerged from the shadow of the French Revolution and Napoleon. He was afraid of enjoyment and waste. In order to create an image of people-friendly simplicity, Louis Philippe did not even allow servants to hold an umbrella for him. The Queen and her children are not allowed to dress in jewelry and must show themselves in ordinary clothes and simple clothing. As King Louis Philippe, he would bow at a 90-degree angle just like the Japanese bow masters before every speech. But in fact this approach did not win him a good reputation or have any positive effect on the rule of the July dynasty. Politicians regarded him as a puppet, businessmen regarded him as a plaything, and civilians thought Louis Philippe was a weak idiot. Extremely satirical works such as The Peking emerged one after another 9 years after the massacre in Lyon, French workers took to the streets again. In fact, in terms of misery alone, French workers are much more miserable than British workers. The latter only have low pay and low status, while the former barely have enough to eat. On average, French workers need to work more than 14 hours a day just to barely have enough to eat. However, because France's agriculture was extremely backward at that time, food prices were unstable. However, as the number of overseas colonies increased, food that was not enough to eat had to be transported to the colonies. This made it even more unbearable for French workers, and at the same time, French farmers were equally miserable. Due to the high proportion of land rent, farmers have no incentive to improve agricultural production. Similarly, landowners and capitalists are not interested in engaging in such high investment and low return projects. They prefer Texas cattle raising and estate planting industries, which are truly low investment and high return projects, except for the return rate of industry, which is also very impressive. Mainly because the cycle is too long. Investment in finance and overseas colonial undertakings seems so good and correct in comparison. As a result, French agriculture has not made significant progress compared to the period of the French Revolution. Take wheat as an example. At this time, the yield per mu in Austria, the German states, and Italy was about 130 kilograms. In most areas of France, the yield per mu is only 70 to 80 kilograms, which is nearly double the difference. The high quality wheat used in the Austrian royal estate can even reach 150 kilograms. As long as a few more key points are exceeded in the future, the yield per mu will soon exceed the 200 kilograms mark. Agricultural technology at that time was still very backward, and the output of modern agriculture seemed completely astronomical at the time. The two most common problems faced by French farmers at this time were no work and not enough to eat. Historically, due to Guizot's-tolerant policies, the conflicts between workers, farmers and the French government were less intense. But at this time Louis-Philippe had actually dismissed Guizot, and most of the policies he formulated were not implemented. So these contradictions came to the surface again. France, to allure his palace, your Majesty the King, order a suppression. Let those mud-legged and coal-black people figure out what they are. To the surprise of many people, it was the leader of the Bonapartist faction who strongly advocated suppression. Nagizi refers to those who farm, and Mihizi refers to those who work in factories. In fact, at this time the Bonapartists had already united with the emerging industrial and commercial bourgeoisie, and the but determined the head. At this time, the workers' strike affects their interests, and the Bonapartists will naturally take the lead. In fact, whether it is the Bonapartists, the Orthodox, or the Orleans faction, those mud-legged and soot-skinned people must be suppressed. However, all three parties have ulterior motives, and want to take the opportunity to expand their political influence, and at the same time attack the other party's power. Of course, the Bonapartists wanted to protect their own interests, while the Orthodox wanted to use this to attack Louis-Philippe and find ways to restore legitimacy to France. The Orleans faction behind Louis-Philippe cannot be called a political party in the strict sense. They are more like a loose club of the elite. These people didn't care about politics or even about King Louis-Philippe. All they wanted was money. Therefore, in order to coordinate the interests of the three parties, the Bonapartists finally only received permission to dispatch local police forces to suppress. In fact, the scale of this time was no smaller than the Lion Workers' Strike in 1834, but there were no casualties yet. The reason for the Orthodox faction is that unnecessary casualties should not be caused. This reason is very attractive to the Orleansites, because this group of self-proclaimed social elites like this kind of high-sounding reason, because it is worthy of their status. The Orthodox faction who opposed directly sending troops naturally did not pity the civilians, nor did they suddenly become kind-hearted. What they needed was to embarrass the July dynasty and then turn the tide to gain support at home and abroad. In fact, the Orthodox faction is not monolithic. Some people support Angoulême, the son of Charles X, known as Louis XIX in history, but more people are willing to support the Count of Chambord, the grandson of Charles X. In particular, the Count of Chambord's mother sneaked back to France many times to create rebellions, including the Duchess of Bailey, who was also planning a famous rebellion at this time. Therefore, the Orthodox faction naturally hopes that France will be as chaotic as possible. Of course, the reason why France is so chaotic at this time is also due to its good neighbors. France has always been the biggest patron of the French labor movement. Of course, apart from Austria, the British have also been giving them blood transfusions at this time. In order to undermine the relationship between Britain and France, France increased his investment and prepared to disclose this information to Britain and France at a suitable time point. He did not believe that Britain and France would be able to join forces by then, and even if they repaired their relationship, it would be nothing but compromise. Assassinations were actually very common in this era, but even so, France didn't think the success rate of the assassination could be high, and the cost once discovered was too high. In contrast, it would be safer to plunge both Britain and France into civil strife and then make them suspicious of each other. As for supporting the labor movement, the cost is negligible. In addition, businessmen in this era dared to do anything, buying guns from France to give to the Chartists, and buying guns from Britain to give to the French Workers' Party. This operation is not difficult and the risk is not high, but the benefits are extraordinary. Even if you are discovered, you can use the name of charity to excuse it. It can be said to be low risk and high reward. Chapter 418. The worst era. The best of times. Prussia, Silesia. In fact, compared to the weavers in Silesia, the workers in Lyon and the British Chartists lived a fairy-like life. The weavers here are not only exploited by factory owners, but also exploited by subcontractors, a remnant of the guild era, and landowning aristocrats. Weavers who want to work in factories even have to pay a special textile tax. Layers of oppression have turned what was once Austria's wealthiest region into a hell on earth. But it's not just exploitation that makes it a real hell. Rather, the government ignored the life and death of the local people and allowed factory owners to continue to significantly reduce workers' wages, while also allowing businessmen to increase the prices of food and materials. The Silesian textile industry had more than 100,000 workers at its peak, but by 1843 there were only 38,000 workers left. In history, tens of thousands of weavers starved to death in 1842 alone, and countless others were imprisoned or died due to theft, robbery, etc. However, in this generation Austria joined the German customs union and also provided very generous immigration and labor policies. Therefore, most of the weavers who were supposed to starve to death in 1842 chose to go to Austria to survive, and the historical tragedy did not happen. However, the increase in exchanges with Austria has intensified the dissatisfaction of this group of people. They felt that the Prussian government did not regard them as one of its own. However, what is even more embarrassing is that the Austrians in the Lower Silesia region, which is only separated by a river, will often patrol the riverside with guns to prevent the Prussians from Upper Silesia from sneaking across. Silesia was once a dependency of the Austrian Empire, but Upper Silesia was lost to Prussia during the War of Austrian Succession. Coupled with the experience of the 30 Years' War, Upper and Lower Silesians were very hostile to each other. Although only separated by the Oder River, the two sides have never been in contact with each other. Especially when the people of Upper Silesia have been having a hard time in recent years. As a former compatriot, they are the ones who are the most ruthless. Of course, when Austria was in decline in the past, Upper Silesians behaved in the same way. So, when Silesians prepare to go to Austria to seek life, they have to go in a big circle. Since they could only go to Austria to work, the historical tragedy did not happen, but the tax reduction in Silesia was real. This made the Prussian high-level officials very dissatisfied, and they threatened local buyers and junker nobles. If taxes continue to be reduced, their privileges will be revoked. In fact, local package buyers and junker nobles are also worried about reduced income. As a result, this group of people expressed their dissatisfaction to the Prussian government. That is, the weavers in Silesia had gone to Austria. In fact, this is nothing in itself, but it depends on how you understand it. For example, it can be understood that these Silesians are disloyal to Prussia. They would rather build Austria than work seriously on Prussian soil. Although it was an extremely crooked understanding, it struck a chord in the hearts of William IV and the Prussian senior officials at this time. Prussia was obviously weaker than Austria in all aspects, especially during the Luxembourg crisis, and its chairmanship was almost unshakable. Now even the headquarters of the German Saals Union has moved to Vienna. and it seems that sooner or later they will also move the headquarters of the German Confederation there. In fact, this was a complete coincidence. The headquarters of the German Zollverein and the German Confederation were temporarily rotated. It just happened to be Vienna's turn when Prussia and other countries were forcing the palace. Of course, it is not ruled out that he would force the palace after Vienna's turn. After all, this way there would be more articles to do, and it would make Austria appear more arrogant. The complaints of the local junker nobles in Silesia just hit the fragile self-esteem of the Prussian top brass. The Prussian government immediately banned unemployed workers from Silesia from traveling to Austria, and violators were subject to heavy fines. The Prussian government's original intention was to keep people here to keep Silesia's local textile industry alive, while preventing Austria from taking advantage of its cheap labor. Then the livelihood of these poor weavers was completely cut off. The local factory owners received government support and tried their best to squeeze out the last value of these people. In fact, no one among the top Prussian officials saw the possible disadvantages of doing so, but at this time, Friedrich List was no longer the poor boy he had been. He is a mature politician and naturally understands that if you want to take something, you must give it first. Only if he helps others first can others help him. This is the price that must be paid to integrate into a new group. Officials protect each other. This has always been the case. Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace. Franz gathered his friends together for no other reason than to spend money. In fact, there is nothing that can be done about it, because Franz discovered a problem. The poor in Austria always spend more money than the rich. Whether it is installment payments or dividends, the result is that the poor buy and buy like crazy, and then the rich deposit the money in the bank or continue to invest. Compound interest is really scary. Even an interest rate of 5% can make many people invincible. This is how the gap between rich and poor widens unintentionally, and when you come back to your senses and want to solve it, it is already an insurmountable gap. Some people think that the country must be governed according to law. Wouldn't it be solved by setting up a tax? Do you have the nerve to call yourself a time traveler? In fact, Franz wanted to explain something that almost all time travelers have done throughout the ages, but don't know why. That's why you must do everything yourself and run your own business and enterprise instead of letting others do it to collect taxes, because in fact, establishing taxes has never been a problem. The difficulty is collecting taxes and how to raise them. There are many laws in this world that have good intentions and are excellent in their formulation, but they are counterproductive when it comes to implementation. For example, Western inheritance taxes, personal income taxes, inheritance laws, etc. have actually become laws that restrict the transformation of the middle class into large assets. Montesquieu said, "If the rich do not live in luxury, the poor will starve to death." Although this sentence is vulgar, it is not wrong under the monarchy. Because money does make money, and the result of allowing capital and wealth to continue to accumulate will either be the destruction of the country or the destruction of the family. Nobles annexing land and businessmen joining forces to monopolize the market will ultimately have the same result. Franz does not want to create a world similar to those millions of reincarnations, so for the time being he can only use hedonism and consumerism to help the development of the country's tertiary industry. Speaking of playing, Franz decided to start a football league first. After all, it is considered a relatively mature sport, which can not only strengthen the body, but also enhance national cohesion. And history has proven that Europe prefers football relatively speaking, and other supporting facilities and publicity can be solved slowly. As for other entertainment items, we have to rely on Franz's friends. After all, Franz does not belong to this era in a strict sense. Even though he was born in this era, he lives in seclusion, and the things he studies may be somewhat out of touch with the times. I drank some wine in the evening and felt a bit uncomfortable, and what I wrote may have been a bit erratic. Just take a look. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 419, Archduke Carol. Due to too many chapters being deleted before, Archduke Carol's role is very small. Some people even don't know who Archduke Carol is now, So some repairs have been made to this chapter. March 2, 1835. Francis II, the last emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, passed away. Although he founded the Austrian Empire, he never publicly crowned him with this crown. In this generation, the Austrian Empire joined the German Customs Union, and at the same time, created the Apennine Commercial League. It dominated the Near East crisis caused by the Turkish-Egyptian War. It continued to win in the struggle, and its influence was expanding day by day. It looked like the hegemon of Central Europe. But Franz II could no longer see it, and could only pass away with endless regrets on the same day. Franz met Archduke Karol. "Ah. You Franz. Yes, I heard you are a genius. Yes, I hope you don't disappoint. Yes." The first conversation between the two ended in a hurry. Later, Archduke Karol came to give Franz several lessons. Of course, the former himself enjoyed the lectures, but the students in the class, except the latter, could not understand them at all. Then Archduke Karol lost his job, and the next time he heard Franz's name was from his arrogant son, Friedrich. Friedrich has been riding the halo of genius since he was a child. In his eyes, except for his father and eldest brother, all living beings are useless. But for such a person to praise Franz without hesitation, Archduke Karol knew that there was another remarkable person in his family. Similarly, his eldest son Albrecht also spoke highly of Franz, which made Archduke Karol more and more curious about this young man. After that, the two of them evaluated the war in Zendler, and Franz visited Archduke Karol's house. After some exchanges between the two, Archduke Karol became more interested in this junior. After that, just before the food crisis broke out, Archduke Karol learned of Franz's plan from Friedrich. Archduke Karol realized the destructive disaster that the food crisis could bring. He did not hesitate to spend a large amount of money to rescue the market, and used his strong influence to give the Austrian Empire a hand. Of course, if Solomon Rothschild had not come out to disrupt the situation, Franz would not need the help of Archduke Karol. But no if. He was still very grateful to this great uncle. When the crisis really broke out, Archduke Karol sold the grain at the price stipulated by law. He felt a little emotional after gaining both fame and fortune. Even though he defeated Napoleon and turned the tide, creating a miracle in military history, he did not receive any gratitude from anyone. Even his brothers and subordinates had no time to celebrate with him. They were more uneasy and fearful, as well as the anger of losing relatives and friends. This time, Archduke Karol didn't feel that he had done anything, but those who used money to buy food were very grateful to him. Those people were celebrating. They were glad that, because of his existence, they did not have to starve to death or beg. For the first time, Archduke Karol began to re-examine the world. He seemed to take both Franz and the war too lightly. War may be much more complicated and cruel than he thought. The art of war was Franz's first physical gift to Archduke Karol. Although it was far less valuable than information on railways, stocks, and grain, it was equally valuable. Only when reading the two books, The Art of War and On War together, can Archduke Karol feel relieved. But there was one thing that Archduke Karol couldn't let go of. He didn't want to be a loser, even the strongest loser in history. But there seems to be no chance in Austria. Even in the crisis, the senior officials still cannot accept him leading troops on the border. Crisis in Serbia and Hungary, the glory of regaining Belgrade in the end, could only be given to a child like Franz. Archduke Karol knew that his era was over. Napoleon Bonaparte, Mikhail Kutuzov, Wellington, Horatio Nelson, and himself. A bloody war with millions of soldiers and the European continent as its canvas was over. Archduke Karol did not feel that Gebhard Lebrecht von Blücher was qualified to rank with him. In fact, Archduke Karol has a high reputation in the Austrian military circles, but his experience is disappointing. He became famous at a young age, and became Field Marshal of the Austrian Empire at the age of only 25. However, what makes people convinced is not his identity, but his tactical level and achievements. Every victory at the Battle of Aldenhofen, the Battle of Nervanden, the Battle of Watney, and the Battle of Fleurus was very rare, because Austria obviously lacked talent in this aspect of warfare. At that time, amid the overwhelming news of the defeat, Archduke Karol's victory seemed particularly dazzling. Because of this, His promotion seemed so natural. Archduke Karol was not only a general, but also a reformer. From 1801 he became the chairman of the Austrian Supreme Military Council. Archduke Karol was determined to implement military reforms, decisively abandoned the old military system, carefully absorbed Napoleon's army building experience and combat ideas, and planned to reorganize the Austrian army and implement divisional organization. It is a pity that the reform could not be carried out because it touched the interests of too many people. Those who opposed him kept making suggestions to Emperor Francis II. On the other hand, they actively campaigned to erect a permanent statue of him and call him the savior. Although Archduke Karol rejected those vanities, he never thought about or did anything detrimental to the emperor or the country. However, great achievements shock the master is not an empty talk. After all, Franz II could no longer trust his younger brother. Without the emperor's support, the reform naturally could not continue, and Archduke Karol had to resign. Although the reform failed, it actually selected some talents for Austria, trained a group of qualified soldiers, and laid the foundation for the future Aspern-Essling battle. In 1809, Archduke Karol defeated Napoleon at the Battle of Aspern-Essling. If Archduke John hadn't been too late to look forward and look back, the history of the world might even have been rewritten. This was Napoleon's first defeat in a large-scale battle on a frontal battlefield, since he commanded the army, and it was also the last time Archduke Karol won a victory in a large-scale battle. In the Battle of Wagram in the same year, although Archduke Karol was defeated, it was not easy for Napoleon to win. The proportion of officers killed in battle was extremely high, and the casualty proportion was even higher than that of the Austrian army. Although Napoleon himself took revenge, the death of a large number of outstanding officers also laid hidden dangers for his future downfall. But at this time, Francis II was tired of the war. Austria sued for peace with France, and Archduke Karol left with his crown. From then on, the two brothers became strangers. Later, Napoleon, the Great Devil, was finally hanged by various countries in Leipzig, and the commander-in-chief of the coalition was his former chief of staff, Prince Schwarzenberg. The second time at Waterloo, it was the Duke of Wellington who witnessed the fall of the brightest star of this era, who was also good at defense. Archduke Karol thought more than once that if he had known better and been more tolerant at that time, maybe he would not be a spectator, but also a shining star on the stage. In the following decades, there were no more wars in Europe, and the name Archduke Karol was gradually forgotten. However, he was not reconciled until Franz sent him a strange poem. River is red, the anger rushes to the crown, and the rain stops by the temple. Looking up to the sky and roaring, with strong feelings. 30 years of fame and dust, 8,000 miles of clouds and moon. Don't wait to see the young man's head grow white, and it will be empty and sad. The shame of Austerlitz has not yet been resolved. My brother's hatred, when will it be destroyed? Be from scratch, clean up the old mountains and rivers, overturn it. Archduke Karol is the younger brother of Grandpa Franz, and is considered an uncle. Chapter 420 How to play, Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace. What do you usually play now, Franz? Asked straight to the point. Fight the beast. Adolf von Lebstensky, the eldest grandson of Count Korolaf and the future Count Lebstensky. He shouted first with the loudest voice, and Richard Metternich looked at the former with contempt and said, "Enjoy the opera." Due to the poor relationship between Count Korolaf and Prince Metternich, their descendants also had a poor relationship. Although they all played in the same circle, they had their own factions. Richard Metternich felt that his hobbies were elegant, while Adolf's hobbies were vulgar, and he obviously won. On the other hand, the latter feels that the former is not a man, and what he plays is what a man should play. Teenage boys always have endless things to talk about when it comes to playing, but of course the people behind them seem much more normal. Listen to music, race, hunt. However, these extremely ordinary entertainment activities could not arouse Franz's interest at all. He hoped to find a wide range of entertainment projects that were acceptable to people, thereby developing a tertiary industry. However, most of these have already formed industries, and unless the communication media changes, it is difficult to make much progress. For example, inventions such as tape recorders and video recorders, but these are still far away from this era. Although the people following Franz were only a group of teenagers, They were the most powerful group of teenagers in the entire Austrian aristocratic circle at this time. Their knowledge was far beyond that of their peers of this era. Naturally, some people could tell from Franz's face that he was obviously not very interested, and the reason why they were sent here by the major families was to establish a personal relationship with Franz. Getting someone's attention is the first step in building a personal relationship. Take pictures, said Luca Ambris. It is said that the development speed of cameras in Austria is comparable to the speed of light. It took only a few years to go through half a century in history. Due to the maturity of silver halide technology and Franz's determination of the research direction of silver halide and the development direction of cameras as a result, film, which was supposed to come out in 1888, was developed in 1843. At the same time, other camera technologies are also constantly improving, and the size and weight are rapidly reducing from the initial 150 kilograms to 8 kilograms at this time. At the same time, prices are also falling. At this time, the price of a latest camera only costs 500 florins. Although it is slightly higher than the French and British cameras, its performance is more than 100 times better. In fact, cameras from other countries did not have practical value at this time, and were only circulated in a very small circle. There was indeed a wave of photography in the aristocratic circles, but Franz was already working on this project. His approach was the same as that of Kodak in history, which used film to control the market. Franz didn't even bother to change the slogan, and just use the original version. You just press the button, and we do the rest. Camera equipment at this time mostly used bulky printing plates to capture images, which was a difficult job to operate alone. Additionally, these plates must be developed immediately after exposure to be photographed to obtain a usable image. This makes photography more of a niche hobby or funded project, out of reach for many. The film must be installed in the darkroom first. After taking the photos, the camera must be sent back to a special printing factory. Then the factory must pay for the printing and mounting. Then the camera must be loaded with new film and the photos can be sent to the user. This was the sales philosophy of Eastman Kodak back then. It pioneered the use of camera sales to drive film sales. It was epoch-making at the time, and attracted countless photography enthusiasts. More importantly, it successfully controlled the market for nearly 100 years. Until the day of bankruptcy, Kodak was still the dominant player in the film industry. Franz felt that it was necessary to learn from this experience. Due to the superposition of patents and other factors, the Austrian Royal Photography Company has a market share of as high as 99% worldwide. It's just that the market is still very small at this time, and most people don't even know what a camera is. Franz smiled subconsciously and said, "Good one." Look at Franz's appearance, and the others knew they were on the right track. As a result, a group of people started talking about it, but the content they said was too unreasonable and had no reference value. Raising Canary's Edward Taffy was also very anxious, but he had no choice but to be clumsy and small in stature, so it was difficult for him to say such a sentence. Originally, this sounded nothing to Franz's ears. Just like the 8 banners back then, listening to music and walking around, smoking, drinking, and gathering people to gamble, were just routine operations of some nobles. But in this enduring laughter, Franz heard something else. Their laughter seemed to be extremely sarcastic. You must know that Taffy is one of the friends who is closer to Franz, and the Taffy family is in full swing at this time, so these guys have no reason to laugh at him. Franz followed suit. Why raise a canary? Wouldn't it be better to raise a parrot? You can also raise a pug, which can be trained to speak. Or you can get a falcon or a seabird, which can also be used for hunting. After hearing what Franz said, everyone looked at each other, but no one dared to laugh. After all, Franz grew up in a deep palace, so it is understandable that he does not understand the things outside. Moreover, both Franz's identity and the reputation he has accumulated have left an impression in the hearts of these children that cannot be taken lightly. No one dared to laugh at Franz because he was too strong to be human. But from then on, everyone finally discovered that Franz was an ordinary person, and there were things he didn't understand. Franz's habitual thinking prevented him from seeing the truth of the matter, but he knew that there must be something wrong with his view. Am I wrong? Pugs, parrots, falcons, sea greens, and the like are different from canaries. Akadov said nonsense. Some of them thought of something. How could a man as smart as Franz not think of it? He must have thought of it, but he was embarrassed. Under the guidance of this line of thinking, Richard Metternich spoke. How about raising one for fun? Franz thought about it, and it seemed to make sense. After all, hearing is false, and seeing is believing. If you raise one yourself, you can understand the life of the nobles of this era. Then, just by a few, how many, the people around him seemed to look at Franz in a somewhat complicated way. What's going on with you guys? Nothing. Everyone avoided. How many are you raising? Franz asked Taffy casually. 2. Taffy said sheepishly. Then, I'll raise 3. Franz said casually. At this time, he was even thinking about whether he should buy a few for his younger brothers and sisters. Then, when will you come with us to see the goods? Richard Metternich said mysteriously, looking at the goods. Franz asked a little strangely. The next day, Vienna Old Town Opera House, Chapter 421 Canary, Vienna, Old Town Opera House. Since this place is one of Solomon Rothschild's underground industries, any manager will not give face to ordinary officials, not to mention that the person in charge, Chio Rom, was different from everyone else in the theater. He was from a true noble family and even had the title of Earl. However, during the Napoleonic Wars, his family fortune was wiped out, and even his family members were killed or injured. However, his family did not receive compensation after the war. Chio Rom enjoyed prosperity and wealth in his early years, but fell into poverty in his youth. In his middle age, he met the most important nobleman in his life, Solomon Rothschild. Although Solomon Rothschild's business has been poor in recent years and his reputation has plummeted as a white glove, his business has been good. Austria's economy has developed rapidly in recent years, and the entertainment industry has naturally made great progress. Especially the upper class nobles and businessmen are having more and more fun. People say that there were 2 emperors in Vienna. One was Emperor Ferdinand, who sat in the palace, and the other was King Solomon, who lived in the Caesar Hotel, now moved to the Lion's Pride Hotel. In fact, there is another one, and that is him, Chio Rom, the king of the night in Vienna. But today he encountered some difficult problems. Someone wanted to buy a canary. This is not a problem. After all, performances are held every day, and guests can choose slowly. After all, such elegant things should be done slowly. However, this time the guest was very rude, demanding immediate service and the best products in the city. Usually when encountering this kind of situation, Chio Rom would not be alarmed, and his subordinates would just drive the person away. If the other party dares to make a mistake, they will be arrested directly by the gendarmerie, or they will be blocked in an alley and beaten. However, this time the person who made the request, Chio Rom, could not afford to offend him. Not only could he not afford to offend him, but Solomon might not be able to offend him at this time either. The young man in front of him, who looked to be 17 or 18 years old, was the eldest grandson of Count Korolev and the future Count Lebstinsky. This kind of person cannot afford to be offended. Not to mention that his family is already rich and powerful, but his personal future is also unlimited. As a businessman, naturally he would not do this kind of thing, especially when it is too late for such a young man to curry favor. So how dare he offend him? It's just that Chio Rom, the king of the night, still needs face. Lord Akadov, please rest assured that our products are the best in Vienna. Chio Rom gave a rare smile. But the young man opposite didn't buy it. You don't understand what I'm saying, do you? I want the best in this city. Everything. I'll give you a week. If you can't do it, I'll demolish this shabby house. Although Chio Rom wanted to strangle the guy in front of him immediately, he still said with a smile on his face, "We are not the only ones you know about Vienna. Don't worry, someone has already informed you. You just need to leave the venue." Akadov said casually, but Chio Rom was not an ignorant person. He knew that this would be a huge event business. Soon the news spread in Vienna, and the entire aristocratic circle knew that a grand banquet was about to be held. Vienna, Lion's Pride Hotel. The news spread quickly, and Solomon thought this might be an opportunity, because the buyer this time was very potential. Solomon now likes young people with potential. Perhaps he feels increasingly powerless and always wants to pin his hopes on the future. However, there seems to be a lack of people among his nephews who can do great things. Lionel son of Nathan Meer Rothschild and nephew of Solomon, maybe one, but he is still too young, and always seems hesitant resolution, and getting too close to the British government. There is no doubt that this is playing with fire. Lionel's ambition is obviously not as small as he himself portrays. The young man intends to surpass his father. Not only does he want to become the master of the British financial world, but he also wants to enter the political world and move from behind the scenes to the front. This ambition was too ambitious, but what really made Solomon feel uneasy was whether Britain, which seemed to be at its peak at this time, would collapse in an instant like the Napoleonic Empire. At this time, Russia dominated the East, France dominated Western Europe, and had global colonial plans like Britain and Austria. The ancient empire was also recovering. Lionel made his bet too early. Solomon's sons were even more useless. Not only did they have no ability, they even had no ambition. He knew very well that it would be very difficult for his descendants to maintain the family business, let alone make progress. He might be swallowed up by his own relatives. For this reason, he must start to make arrangements for his descendants, and winning over some of the country's future nobles is a good choice. Grandpa. A little girl suddenly threw herself into Solomon's arms. Hearing this sweet call made his brows relax slightly. Scarlett, why are you here? The little girl snuggled into her grandfather's arms, blinking playfully. I came with my father. The little girl's voice was clear and crisp. Solomon looked up at the awkward man at the door. He was Solomon's eldest son, Anselm Solomon von Rothschild, and the little girl beside him was Anselm's youngest daughter Scarlett Rose. Chilled. Solomon did not like his eldest son, Anselm, who was a professor, but not a good businessman. Anselm started asking his father to manage the business very early. He was not useless in the original world line. On the contrary, he was Solomon's most valued child, because he managed the Rothschild family's business in an orderly manner. But due to the arrival of Franz in this life, the entire Austrian business landscape has completely changed. Anselm was completely powerless against Franz's dimensionality reduction attack, and even made mistakes in several key decisions. Anselm lost not only money, but also confidence and self-esteem. At this time, he saw his father filled with fear. Father, what are you doing here? Solomon asked. Father, today is Scarlett's birthday, and she wants to spend it with you. Solomon pinched his granddaughter's cute little nose and said dotingly, happy birthday to you, little clever guy. Thank you, Grandpa. Scarlett hugged Grandpa's neck and kissed him. Grandpa, I got first place in the exam again. Really? My little Scarlett is really amazing, but don't be like your father. It will be bad if you become a fool. Anselm lowered his head lower. Scarlett went to the Rothschild family genealogy school. Although there were only a few students, all of them were outstanding in Solomon's eyes, so it was not easy for her granddaughter to get the first place. What do you want? As long as you ask, Grandpa can satisfy you. Another side of the city. A man wearing a black trench coat and a peaked cap was looking at the girls in the troupe with a very critical eye. It seemed that he was not selecting actors, but selecting products. This man is not the final buyer, but the one who decides which products go on display. Their industry also has industry standards, so-called slender legs, swan neck, and open, stretched, straight, and erect. In addition, the appearance should not be too bad. Open means that the dancer opens symmetrically from the shoulders, chest, hips, knees, and ankles. Especially the feet should be opened 180 degrees outward. Various foot positions and any movement require the legs to be opened outward from the hip joints. At the same time, you must have a cheerful personality, an open character, and be willing to accept new things. Stretching means that the instep of any extended foot must be straight and the top of the foot should be prominent. Even if the foot shape is beautiful, it also increases the expressiveness of the foot. You must be able to hold up your clothes when wearing them, otherwise points will be deducted. Most of these girls have been practicing ballet since they were 8 years old, or even younger. They torture their bodies to the limit every day, just so that one day they can emerge from their cocoons and become butterflies and perform on stage. Most of them came from poor backgrounds, and women at the time were generally not considered a labor force. The only contribution they could make to the family was to sell themselves to the troop. Families who sell their daughters receive a small sum of money, usually 100 francs. The parents of these girls will tell them to work hard before they leave, and they will meet again when they can perform on stage. In fact, this is usually a lie. Of course, there are also unscrupulous parents who wait until their children can finally perform on stage and come back to ask for money. A small number of chosen girls were herded into carriages like ducks, and their destination was the Old Town Opera House. A grand ballet will be held here soon, and they are told that many dignitaries will come to watch it, and the remuneration will be 10 times the usual amount. These selected girls naturally cheered for joy, and of course some interested people have already begun to compete for the position of lead dancer, because they know very well how much gain this can bring them. Abdounia Gifford is one of these girls. She was sent to the theatre troupe at the age of 6, and endured almost inhuman torture for 8 years, before she emerged as the leader of the troupe. She once dreamed that after dancing, there would be waves of applause and a sea of flowers. However, after Abdounia's first performance, she understood that that was not reality at all. The reality was that, if you wanted to become a principal dancer, you had to either please the fat and wretched troupe leader, or find a powerful golden man, the Lord as a backer. Otherwise, even if he became a formal actor, he would still have to endure the torture of being hungry and having a full meal. In front of Schönbrunn Palace, Franz dressed in civilian clothes and got into a luxury carriage. To be honest, Franz felt stupid for doing this, but his friends all wanted him to keep a low profile. Originally, Taffy said that he wanted to take Franz to see the goods, but the latter wanted to refuse because he thought it was a complete waste of time. However, under the strong request of the former, Franz reluctantly agreed. However, Franz had done some research before. This opera house was the property of Solomon Rothschild. On the surface it was a theater, but in fact it was the largest black market in Vienna. But Franz didn't think that his friends would be related to the black market. Maybe they were just looking for goods. And the destination was just an opera house in Vienna, so Franz just deployed a guard team of 500 people nearby in advance. Franz's friends have already booked a private room on the 3rd floor, and with a group of 20 guards, he thinks it should be foolproof. It's just that Franz's friends don't feel so good. They feel uncomfortable all over. Every hair on their body is uncomfortable. Because Colonel Bordeaux was watching them. Although Franz did not think that his friends would be detrimental to him, Colonel Bordeaux would definitely not be detrimental to him, so he still chose to believe the former Colonel Bordeaux was surprisingly not angry. On the contrary, he felt that this was a normal social interaction for the Grand Duke. As for disguise, it was a very wise approach, because doing so could avoid a lot of unnecessary trouble. So Colonel Bordeaux and his men also disguised themselves, but their aesthetics still stayed in the last century. After disguise, they looked like a group of theater actors. Although it seemed outrageous and embarrassing, there was no obstruction when entering. This was of course what Chio Rom ordered. His original words were, "No matter how outrageous you see, don't stop it. Even if they come with an elephant, you must carry that elephant in with a smile." Franz and his party arrived at the reserved private room smoothly, and the entire journey was so uneventful that he even felt a little bored. Actually, come to think of it, a group of well-dressed teenagers, surrounded by a large group of guards, must be so blind that they dare to come and cause trouble. The performance soon began, and the song Giselle was based on the story of a German winter by the German poet Heine. The performance was wonderful, but Franz looked confused. Is this a warm-up? Everyone looked at each other and nodded in agreement, but Franz felt even more strange. Could it be that canaries have become a rare species that can only be purchased on the black market? Generally speaking, coal miners like to keep this kind of bird because it may save your life at critical moments. Toxic gases such as carbon monoxide and methane are often present under mines. These deadly gases are colorless, odorless, and difficult for humans to detect, but birds have fast metabolisms, and a small amount of poisonous gas can make them comatose. Mine workers take the canary down to the mine. As long as there is something abnormal about it, the workers can immediately detect it. But this thing should have nothing to do with being expensive, otherwise the miners wouldn't be able to afford it. At this time, Franz found that his group of friends who usually sneered at art were staring at the stage intently. He followed everyone's gaze and looked over, but he didn't find anything special. In fact, Franz lacked talent for art appreciation and had no interest in things like ballet. Soon he fell asleep, and Colonel Bordeaux kindly helped Franz put on his cloak. After an unknown amount of time, the actors all began to take their curtain call, and Franz woke up and clapped to himself. Wonderful, wonderful. Everyone looked at each other and had no choice but to applaud. When Franz thought everything was over, the evil had just begun. The glamorous dancers on the stage are indeed goods waiting to be sold off the stage. The pure white girl on the stage and the dark gentleman below formed a sharp contrast. The so-called canaries are these young and beautiful girls. Chapter 422 Appreciation. After the show, there was no auction as Franz had imagined. Instead, the host began to introduce the dancers. At this time, no matter how slow Franz was, he understood the meaning of the canary. But shouldn't these ballerina girls be called little mice? Little mouse. Franz blurted out unconsciously. Taffy whispered into Franz's ear, "That's what the French call it. It's not elegant at all." Franz was speechless for a while. How could such a thing be associated with elegance? But thinking about it, Europe does not seem to be too taboo about this, but is quite open. Franz didn't want to raise any canaries, but he just couldn't look directly at his friends. But he was still curious, what exactly would these people do? Then Franz really asked, "Edward, what do you use those canaries for?" "Edward." Taffy clasped his fingers in embarrassment and said, "Let them eat some." Strange and disgusting images appeared in Franz's mind, which was reflected in his expression, looking at Taffy with disdain. At this time, Richard Metternich couldn't help but laugh. "Why are you laughing?" Franz asked curiously. "Franz, do you remember the meat mountain from last time?" Richard Metternich reminded. "You mean Miss Harriet?" "Yes, that's Taffy's little canary." Franz still remembered that the last time a Jenny fell several times, the opponent could land smoothly. At that time, Franz was still curious about where Taffy got this monster. The monster weighing more than 200 kilograms could actually turn in the air. Franz couldn't help complaining, "It's really perverted." Then he remembered that a warrior named Oyamabeda on an island country in the east once advocated Edward Taffy ran out covering his face. Edward Taffy is a weak and kind man. He is a good person, but he lacks the domineering and decisiveness that a leader should have. "Want to buy one?" asked Richard Metternich, not interested. Franz really didn't have much interest, but was just a little emotional. He thought he had done a lot over the years, but nothing seemed to have changed. Or rather, it's not enough. How about asking them to bring people up to take a look? "Franz, you are so far away, and how can you see clearly without a telescope?" At this time Akadov handed over a pair of handheld telescope glasses. Yes, it was a small telescope with a handle added to it. It looked like a selfie stick. It is said that it looked more elegant. Franz took the selfie stick and couldn't help but sweat for the soldiers on the Austrian front. If Austria's telescopes were like this, you can imagine what the battle would be like. Fortunately, the Austrian military does not have enough funds to purchase such flashy telescopes. The four in red skirts are the principal dancers of the four major theaters. The one in pink skirt is making her debut on the stage. The one in white skirt is Akadov. Began to introduce eagerly, and Franz could only hold back and try not to breathe. Even though the latter showed a lack of interest, the former did not intend to give up. As a result, Akadov winked at his attendant. The attendant naturally understood what the young master meant, and of course he also knew Franz's identity, so he immediately took action without saying a word. After all, for a small person like him, even if he can leave an impression on Franz, it will be of great benefit to his future. Soon the attendant found Chio Rom. The latter seemed very embarrassed by the other party's request. The former was not a fool and naturally understood what the other party wanted. However, the attendant named Wells did not want to expose Franz's identity, because not only would he not get any benefits, but he might even die as a result. Fortunately, his master's name is enough, and he happens to have money. "Sir, my master liked today's performance very much, and would like to thank everyone." With that, Wells took out a written check from his arms and handed it to Chio Rom. The corners of the latter's mouth couldn't help but twitch. A servant dared to use a check. He felt insulted. However, beating a dog depends on the owner. Chiorom finally convinced himself inside. Sir, are you going to give me a check as a thank you gift? This was so straightforward that Wells had no choice but to take back the check and take out a stack of banknotes and hand it over, then turned to the actors backstage and said, "Please, appreciate it, ladies." Although Wells was smiling, his heart was bleeding because the pile of banknotes was his 5 years salary. His behavior caused dissatisfaction among the sponsors, who were waiting to select the goods in the background. But Chiorom did not prevent the situation from deteriorating further. After all, he is a businessman, and he will never delay all future business because of one business. And he also wanted to see the quality of the people in that box. After all, there were many big shots here today, so it should be very lively. Wells' behavior was hated far beyond his imagination, but he didn't know it. The dancers looked at each other. They had never encountered such a thing before. All the best dancers from the 4 major troops were gathered here, and they were all booked in one go. The girls were soon delivered to Franz like commodities. The dancers obviously did not expect that the guests in front of them were actually children. Especially the one sitting in the corner. What he is holding is obviously juice. Their upright posture and graceful posture are vividly reflected in these dancers. They are indeed selected from all over Vienna and can indeed be called excellent. However, after understanding the dirty deal behind this incident, it was really difficult for Franz to see the beauty in these girls. However, in the 19th century, which was an era that laughed at poverty but not at prostitution, what these girls did was understandable. Accusing them from the moral high ground seems to make Franz even more incompetent. Moreover, the only person in the entire private room who is not qualified to accuse others is Franz himself, but he can control other people's joys and sorrows, even life and death. In the dim box, the little light as big as a bean seemed unable to illuminate this small world. But the dim light creates an indescribable atmosphere, and many people like it, because they can be capable and unscrupulous at this time. The box was very awkward, because Franz was obviously unscrupulous. He had no intention of buying a canary, and no one dared to really take the lead. Akadov was a frequent visitor to such places. Many dancers knew him, and knew that he was the grandson of the most corrupt official in the Austrian Empire and the target of many big shots. So he could only bite the bullet and say it. "Ladies, it's my grandpa's birthday in a few days. Our family is going to hold a grand dance, and my friends all need excellent dance partners. I would like to invite the ladies to honor them." Chapter 423 Appreciation. Vienna, Old Town Opera House. Akadov's meaning couldn't be more obvious. Let these canaries do their own thing. That way if someone found Franz, it would be none of his business. Thinking of this, Akadov couldn't help but sigh that he was so clever, and Wells on the side couldn't help but admire his master's resourcefulness. In fact, Franz had already guessed that something similar might happen, so he specially asked Jenny to prepare a set of ordinary clothes for him. If a poor boy suddenly appears among a group of wealthy young men, it will definitely be more eye-catching. So if you want to truly hide among this group of people, you have to become truly ordinary. A common set of noble uniforms, 3 signet rings, and in order not to cause unnecessary trouble, he also specially asked everyone to wear smiling masks before the canaries arrived. Franz believed that no one would notice him. The canaries quickly took action, weaving in and out of the crowd like birds looking for food. Soon a group of people gathered around Altdorf and Richard Metternich. The reason? Of course it was because of their dress and demeanor. Although the two of them wore masks, they were regular visitors to various theaters, so they were still a little bit shy acquainted. There is no doubt that both of them are very good choices. Although they can only have one dance partner each, they still attract most of the birds. These dancers also have their own considerations. These two are big shots, relatively rich and respectable, so there is nothing wrong with choosing them. And if you choose the friends brought by these two big shots, the consequences will be disastrous. Because the more important people like this are, the more they will have some rogues and thugs around them. Because decent people have to do things decently, but people also need to do unseemly things, and once you get involved with such a scoundrel, you will suffer physical and mental damage, and you may even be ruined, and have no place to live. Of course, there are also girls who don't know the reason, and want to be a master. They run around like headless chickens. In fact, what those smart people didn't expect was that there were no real little people in this box. It's just that if you don't have excellent qualities, even if you meet the right person, you won't be able to get the other person to accept your invitation. Franz's friends are very discerning. Even if they are the top canaries in Vienna, most of them cannot catch their eye. Franz was drinking juice out of boredom, while Taffy was sitting too far away from the center of the box, because she was sitting with Franz, so no girl came forward to invite him. Seeing Taffy's eager look, Franz just felt funny. As the first heir to the largest clan in Moravia, this guy seemed to underestimate himself a little too much. If that day comes, if he wants to, there will probably be many princesses from small countries willing to marry him. Franz patted Taffy on the head. What's wrong? Is this jealousy or regret for sitting with me? Franz deliberately said in French. At this time, French was still popular among the Austrian nobles, especially the small nobles and new nobles. This language is highly respected and is the best way for them to show off. Franz, why am I jealous? I'm angry. Yes, angry. Those girls are blind. But what if, what if no one invites us? Wouldn't that make us people look down upon it? Will it look embarrassing? Usually, Taffy is always the best to bully, so Franz often protects him, but he didn't expect that this guy's self-esteem is actually very strong. This is called the fragrance of wine, but also the fear of deep alleys. We are too far away, and we are in a corner position. It is easy for people to think that we are marginal figures or followers. If you want to find a dance partner, you might consider taking the initiative. Then remember to choose a good location next time. As for the dance partner, I actually don't care. After all, I don't want to attend any dance. No one invited me, so I had a reason not to go. After listening to Franz's words, Taffy nodded seriously. If you don't have a dance partner, you won't have a dance partner, so I won't go either. As he spoke, a girl with a round face walked up to Taffy and timidly stretched out her hand. Sir, can I be your dance partner? Of course. Taffy jumped up from the chair and held the other person's hand. Come, have dinner with me later, and I can buy you a new dress. Franz covered his face, so vulgar and philistine. But it was really effective. The girl who was timid just now suddenly said with tears in her eyes, Sir, you are such a good man. In the blink of an eye, almost everyone's dance partners have been finalized. During this period, some people also tried to find Franz, but were dissuaded by his cold eyes. Franz glanced around, and what surprised him was that the principal dancers of the 4 major theaters were still standing there. Hey, what's happening? Just when Franz was full of questions, he made eye contact with one of them, and the other person's apologetic smile was indeed worthy of being beautiful. But Franz was not here to have fun. But when he just looked away, he saw the other 3 principal dancers looking in his direction. Then 4 people in red dresses walked through the crowd and walked in front of Franz. After that, the 4 chiefs simultaneously extended their hands to Franz under the surprised eyes of everyone. Then someone whistled, and then the atmosphere in the entire box became heated. Taffy gave Franz a thumbs up and gave Franz an awesome look. Although the other people had different expressions, they were all just envy, jealousy, and watching a good show. Franz closed his eyes and sighed. It seemed that his disguise was not as impeccable as he thought. As long as he had enough time and experience, he could still judge it. Can I say no? We'll be sad then, one of them said with a smile. But no matter which lady I accept the kindness of, someone will always be sad. So I still then you can dance with each of us. We'll be with you whenever you like. In fact, the 4 principal dancers had already confirmed their guesses from the whistles and cheers just now. Plus the other party's appearance at this time was commonplace. You should know that every theater has its own principal dancer, and their role is to entertain people. And the reason why they can become principal dancers is not just because they are good looking or can dance well. If you want to firmly hold the position of principal dancer, you must understand people's hearts and human nature in order to truly stand out and find someone who can be entrusted to you for life or a meal ticket before you grow old and lose your luster. Of course, some people choose to sell themselves at a high price and then control their own destiny. For example, the proprietress of Golden Time, the largest brothel in Vienna at this time, was once a ballet dancer. She was never married, but there were countless big shots with whom she had scandals. "You won't let me go?" Franz asked. The four of them looked at each other and said in unison, "Please. Appreciate it." Chapter 424 Mr. K. Vienna, Lion's Pride Hotel. When Solomon Rothschild got up early and took the newspaper, he almost spat a mouthful of blood on it. The chief dancers of the four major theater companies resigned at the same time and will form a group to debut. This news filled the front pages of major newspapers, especially the gossip newspapers, which added fuel and jealousy to it and made it beyond recognition. But it is even more eye-catching. At this time, the black market business was Solomon's only stable income besides the bank in Vienna, and the theater was just a facade. At this time, the facade of the store was taken away. How could he not be angry? But one thing shocked Solomon: the principal dancers of the four major troupes resigned at the same time. If it's just one family, it's most likely a conspiracy from other families, but the principal dancers of the four major theater companies were poached at the same time, which means that there is a fifth party who wants to get a piece of the pie in Vienna. At this time, although this behavior has earned enough attention for the fifth party's appearance, it is also equivalent to declaring war on the four major forces at the same time. Anyone who does this is either an idiot or has a huge backing. According to Solomon's past experience, this behavior was no different from suicide, but he had an ominous premonition. Maybe the other party really has enough confidence, just like the Bavarian Mutual Aid Association wiped out the underworld forces in Vienna. No one would have thought that a foreign gang could become the leader of Vienna's underground forces in less than 10 years. Of course, people never expected that this gang would actually be related to the royal family, but insiders dared not say it, because the royal family and the government would not admit it for the sake of face. Then the speaker is slandering the royal family and the government. These are both serious crimes, and the minimum penalty for both crimes is exile. Thinking of this, Solomon decided to wait and see what happens. After all, the four major troupes have their own forces behind them, and the cake of the Vienna underworld is only so big. If there is one more person, everyone will get less points, so it is better to let this new person disappear. In fact, someone had already tested it. Franz and his entourage were followed as soon as the carriage left. Fortunately, he had arranged 500 spies in advance. The gangsters who were following him were confused because suddenly someone made a gesture, and then the whole street rushed towards them as if they were crazy. A few gang thugs were pinned to the ground before they knew what was going on, and then were brutally beaten in a secret police interrogation room, and they called it all out. These guys come from Bohemia. They are thugs raised by the local wealthy Winster family and are responsible for handling some dishonorable matters in business. The Winster family does not have much business in Vienna and is the weakest of the four major theater groups, but he is also the fastest rising among them. It took only a few decades to go from an unknown little noble to the emperor of Bohemia. Even if the governor and senior officials take office, they must visit him first. Without the approval of the Winster family, even government officials cannot take office. Even if they take office, they will die violently or be ruined. Franz did a little research and found out that this person was said to be a king, but in fact he was just a domestic slave in the family of Archduke Karol. Winster's fathers relied on bribes to become the deacons of the Casimir family, the family of Archduke Karol's adoptive father, in Bohemia. After that, they bullied the superiors and subordinates for decades and became a local tyrant, but it was not enough to claim the title of king. In Winster's generation, on the one hand, he continued to use Archduke Karol's family as a cover to reap benefits. On the other hand, he sized up the situation and became the largest patron and actual leader of the Czech national independence movement. This made the Winster family suddenly become a force that cannot be ignored in Bohemia. Even high-ranking officials and governors must act based on their family's face if they want to live a stable life, otherwise there will be unrest in their jurisdiction. In addition, Winster also has a so-called 5,000-strong army called the Czech National Revolutionary Army, which is actually his group of thugs. What they do is to watch the scenes and protect the family business for him. The purpose of these thugs is to find a few easy targets to tie up and then demand ransom from their families to teach them a lesson point, but he didn't expect that Franz's side was arrested. When they were well prepared, it happened that Franz was still worried about having no place to temporarily house the girl group he was planning, so he asked people to continue interrogating those few people in order to collect more evidence. The secret police are very good at interrogations, especially interrogations with a purpose. During this period, a manager of the Winster family in Vienna wanted to come to the secret police prison to arrest someone, and his arrogant attitude was memorable. This person obviously knew more and more detailed information than those thugs, and then the manager was also sent to prison by the leader of the secret police. After a friendly interaction, the Winster family was convicted of dozens of crimes, including but not limited to human trafficking, forcing girls into prostitution, bullying, kidnapping, assassination, poisoning, colluding with foreign governments, and selling national intelligence. Franz wanted the Winster family's property in Vienna. The leader of the secret police understood what he meant when he heard this, and changed the manager of the Winster family in Vienna that day. The Winston family crest was thrown to the ground and replaced with the letter K. The next day, an army marched from Vienna to Prague. At this time, there was a French-style building standing in the center of Prague. In the mansion, with an area of 24,000 square meters, Erich Winter was watching his men twist the noose. The victim's eyes were turned up, and his mouth was white. His limbs were struggling weakly, as if he was trying to catch something, or as if he wanted to kill someone. The victim was originally the son of a wealthy businessman. He was originally from a wealthy family, but as the Austrian Empire joined the German customs union, orders increased significantly. It was originally a great thing, but Baron Winston took a fancy to his family's property. His father was unwilling to sell the family property, and the price offered by Baron Winston was too low, so he rejected the proposal. But he also suffered unexpected disasters. Baron Winter claimed that the wealthy businessman and his family were lackeys of the Austrians. After that, a large number of Czechs came to beat the wealthy businessman to death and robbed all his family's belongings. His heart bleeds as he looks at his disheveled mother, blindly searching for his father's remains in the ruins of their home. He wants revenge. But unfortunately, the power of the Winster family is so huge that no lawyer is willing to defend him. In the end, even if an upright judge risked his career and life, he only received a pension of 100 florins and a very reluctant sorry. It took him 3 years to finally get the chance to assassinate Baron Winston, but he failed. Baron Winston was neither surprised nor afraid of such an assassination. On the contrary, he enjoyed it, especially the public executions of assassins. Every public execution can shock Zio, and every public execution can make him feel that he is one step closer to the peak of power. Baron Winter swayed his red wine glass lazily, thinking, this is not the first assassin, and it will not be the last. Suddenly, someone stumbled in. Mr. Winter, someone asked you to get out. The man looked very panicked. Winster likes to be called Mr. because it makes him appear more approachable and progressive. Of course, there is another aspect, that is, he feels that the Baron is too young and does not match his status. What Winster wants to do is to be president, Grand President of the Republic of Bohemia. Who is it? You told him to wait. Didn't you see that I'm busy here? There was already a third of anger in Winston's words. Winster usually has a lot of authority. Usually when he talks like this, the other person will shut up and be in panic all day long. But the man still said, Mr. Winter, please get out quickly. There are many people outside, and they all have guns. Gun? Winster snorted coldly, and thought to himself, what's a gun? I still have 50 artillery pieces in my manor outside the city. I don't have many war horses, only 2,000. I can get them tomorrow if I want. Getting to Prague is not a problem either. However, someone coming to the door with a gun aroused Winster's interest. No one has dared to challenge his position in Prague for many years. Of course, he was not afraid, because there were more than 200 gunmen in the mansion at this time, and these people were not ordinary people, but elites of the Czech Republican army who had undergone long-term training. Who is this blind person who wants to challenge me? As soon as Winster said this, the key members of the surrounding family all laughed. They all felt that there was nothing to be afraid of in this world. No one, except God, can do anything to Mr. Winster, but seeing that he often goes to and from the church without being punished by God, it may be that God has acquiesced in his behavior, and their subordinates are naturally more unscrupulous. After a while, the subordinate ran back again. He said his name was Albrecht Friedrich Rudolf Winsters. Men tried hard to search in their minds whether there was a big man named this name in Bohemia, but obviously there was not. Then someone stood up. "Mr. Winter, how dare this man be so rude? I will arrest him now, to make amends to you." Before the man could finish his words, Winster picked up a pistol and shot him in the head. Others may have never heard of this name, or may not know this person, but it was impossible for Winster not to have heard of it. That was the name of the future head of the family. This head of the family is not from the Winster family, but from the Casimir family. No matter how lawless Winston was, he did not dare to show any slight to Archduke Karl's family. Every year, he would bribe Archduke Karl's housekeeper with a large sum of money, so that he could continue to use his name to do evil. Franz has the ability to completely eliminate the Winston family, but he still hopes to let Archduke Karl's family handle it. After all, it will be much more dignified. Archduke Karl went to Switzerland, and Albrecht became the de facto head of the family. This time he went to Prague with his family's guards and the Vienna City Defense Force directly under him. The normally regal Eric West ran out in a panic. He saw the guards of the Grand Duke Karol's family. Their neat military appearance and resolute eyes seemed to have returned to when he was a child. 34 years ago, Archduke Charles rode a white horse and led his army to the front line for a decisive battle with Napoleon. As the army passed through Eric Winster's estate, he was filled with envy. Eric West also wanted to be that kind of person. His father, Old West, told him that he must be rich and powerful. Winster had the urge to worship, but at this time Albrecht was riding a horse and said with a dark face, "What have you been doing all these years?" "It's nothing. I pay full profits to the Grand Duke every year. We, the Winster family, will always be your servants." Winster said these words very naturally, and his attitude changed immediately, as if nothing had happened before. Albrecht raised his hand and threw the note recording the crimes of the Winster family towards Eric Winster. Eric picked up the paper on the ground and looked at it and said very calmly, "This is all false and slanderous to me. I ask you to check it out carefully." Albrecht whipped his riding crop and struck Baron Winter hard on the face, causing the skin and flesh to rip apart immediately. "Do you think I don't know anything, Eric?" Winter did not answer directly, but asked calmly, "Do you want to start a war?" Even if he said these words to Prince Wendigratz, who was in charge of the Bohemian military at this time, the other party would still be wary of it. But Albrecht just said, "You're not qualified." This made Winster feel extremely insulted. No one had ever dared to talk to him like this. Today, it was for the sake of Archduke Karol that he gave face to the young man in front of him. He did not expect that the other party would be so disrespectful. Just as Winster was about to speak, he was interrupted by Albrecht. "I'll give you 20 minutes to let the women and children leave. There won't be anyone alive here after 20 minutes. Winster didn't believe what he was hearing and burst out laughing. Winster believed that such a large-scale military operation in the center of the city would not fail to cause a sensation, and the total number of his Czech National Independence Army in this city had exceeded 10,000. Coupled with the power in his hands, he believed that it won't be long before this army is surrounded. At that time, he will lead a raid on the arsenal, and then take a train to raid Vienna in reverse. However, in fact, the hooligans and local gangsters armed with knives and sticks were frightened to death when they saw the regular army. In fact, the Vienna City Defense Army may not be as good as the second-rate army in terms of combat effectiveness, but in terms of its ability to bully people, it is definitely the best in the Austrian Empire. These dandy boys do nothing but bully people all day long. Just one stop on the street can scare those bastards into pissing their pants. The battle in the mansion couldn't be called a battle at all. It could only be regarded as a slaughter at best. The elites of the Czech Republican army, who had high hopes from Winster, could only hold out for less than a quarter of an hour in front of Albrecht's army. This is not only a difference in numbers, but also a huge difference in equipment. In front of the roaring cannons, those Czech warriors who usually boasted that they were not afraid of death became sheep cowering in the corner at the same time. This is also the first time that a sniper rifle has been put on the battlefield. These scope sniper rifles are the latest product from the Tyrolean arsenal. The Winston family was quickly swept into the dust of history. This military action of the Austrian government has not only caused great harm to the Bohemian region, but it is too late for the civilians to support it. How many people will come out to criticize the government's actions? Besides, the media is also under the control of Austria. Even if someone wants to summon the soul of Windsor or complain, they must consider those German nationalists with high moral. As for the Windsor family's property in Vienna, it was soon taken over by Mr. K, and the theater was renamed the Dark Moon Theater. In fact, the name came about because Franz thought of the name Dark Moon Circus when he decided to establish a troupe. Dark Moon Circus? The four chiefs in the room looked at each other in confusion, wondering what kind of medicine Mr. K was selling in his good, Dark Moon troupe. Let's call it that. You can sell yourself, so why don't you want to work for yourself? Chapter 425. The scenery is not bad here. On April 25, 1843, the yacht Victoria and Albert was launched, but this ship full of love suffered the most profound malice. Many people and forces, for their own reasons, did not want Victoria to visit France, and even wanted her to die. Britain and France were troubled by the labor movement at this time. In fact, they were not the only two countries. Most countries in Europe were in this kind of contradiction. Of course, the exceptions are Austria and Russia. The former is enjoying the dividends brought by technological progress, while the latter does not have its own industry at all. Austria's factories were also divided into royal and private ones. The royal family's factories were highly technological, had high wages, few working hours, and were relatively respectable. However, the requirements were also extremely strict, with so many rules and regulations that it was mind-numbing, and many obligations and responsibilities were also clarified. In fact, the production efficiency is much higher than that of private factories, but France did not kill all private factories at once. Because some things are very realistic and absolute equality is impossible. There is no essential difference between Austria's private factories and other private factories in the world at this time. They are the same in humane and dark, but the wages are slightly higher than those in other German states. This is of course not the conscience of factory owners, but the fact that Austria has state industrial subsidies. It's just that this subsidy was not distributed to the factory, but to the workers. France actually has his own purpose. State-controlled unions are more conducive to maintaining social stability. After all, France has been destined to have certain villain attributes since he was born, and this will not change just because of what he wants to do or what he does, but Franz can decide what he thinks and what he does thanks to state subsidies in the presence of royal factories. Workers in the Austrian Empire had a fairly decent life, and there were even many workers from other countries who came to work here. This is mainly due to traditional thinking. Austria is a traditional agricultural country, and farmers like to guard their own land. Small and medium-sized citizens in cities prefer decent jobs, such as clerks, small civil servants, and small shopkeepers. The Austrian Empire has been relatively stable over the years, so not many people want to work in factories. Even in history, Austria's national factories had to temporarily suspend production because they could not recruit workers. The Austrian National Factory was founded during the reign of Queen Isa with the purpose of increasing fiscal revenue, solving financial difficulties, and at the same time gaining support from the citizen class. However, after 100 years of development, the National Factory has been completely corrupted and completely deviated from the original intention of its establishment. Due to layer upon layer of corruption among officials, factories not only fail to increase government revenue, but also require state funding for subsidies. On the one hand, the management structure is bloated and overstaffed, but on the other hand, there are almost no workers in the factory. It is common for more than 100 officials to work in a factory with more than a dozen people, but no one dares to do anything, because this piece of cake involves the interests of many parties. Cutting off someone's financial path is like killing one's parents. The most dangerous thing is to tamper with the cakes of vested interests, which often requires huge costs. even lives. This is one of the reasons why the vast majority of reformers in history did not end well. Point back to the main story. In short, Austrians are not interested in working in factories, but it is a very good place for German immigrants at this time. The idea of Greater Germany, that was just emerging, was very popular among German immigrants. The most critical and core part of it was to rely on Austria to unify the German Confederation. Point disturbing the order of the Austrian Empire and affecting its development was extended to a crime. Point of course, this was deliberately guided by Franz. After all, he did not want to deal with both domestic nationalism and foreign nationalism. Point as for Russia, after establishing trade relations with Austria, the situation of the nobles opened up. They felt that the development of industry was completely nonsense. Point, because at this time Russia had almost no industrial base, and the industrial gap with Austria was exaggerated. The development of industry now not only requires a large investment of manpower and material resources, but also requires enough time to keep up with Austria's pace. Point in fact, it was because the Russians saw the industrial level of Austria that they misjudged the industrial level of the entire world. Point at the same time, the industry of the Austrian Empire was strong and could fully meet Russia's needs. The alliance between the two parties is relatively stable, and Austria has a large demand for raw materials from Russia. Point this makes the Russians think that they do not need industries other than military for the time being. After all, it is easy to monopolize the import market, but it is not so easy to unify the domestic market. Point therefore, as long as Franz sent someone to understand some important figures in Russia, they would take the initiative to contact the Austrian side and act as compradors. Moreover, investing the money earned in agriculture will yield results faster than investing in industry. In addition, these compradors are originally big landowners. As long as Russia has no industry, they can cut it twice. Point at the same time, you can also stabilize your own strength. So why not? In Russia, not only the nobles are satisfied, but the government is also satisfied, because with the increase in imports and exports, it is easier for the country to collect taxes. The Russian finance minister couldn't open his mouth from ear to ear every time he saw the financial statements. The figures were so beautiful. Point Nicholas I was a monarch who worshipped the military very much, and he also had a group of generals managing the country. They only care about whether this country is strong and peaceful, but not about Russia's future. Point now Russia's treasury is slowly becoming fuller, and its army is becoming more powerful, which makes His Majesty the Tsar very satisfied. Point at this time, Nicholas I was most worried about the Straits issue, because Britain had never given up asking Russia to hand over its privileges in the Bosporus and Dardanelles once the Ottoman Empire was bewitched by Britain and cut off the Straits. Trade between Russia and Austria would be interrupted, and Russia would suffer huge losses. There are two ways to solve this problem. One is to build a direct railway to Austria on the European continent. This will not only waste people and money, but also cause hidden dangers to homeland security. The most important thing is that Austria may not agree. Point another way is to completely surrender the Ottomans and let Russia control the Black Sea Straits. In fact, Nicholas I has been thinking this way for a long time, and the great nobles in the country are also very supportive of this matter. This is not because those nobles suddenly remembered the 1,000-year dream of the Third Roman Empire, but that there is a large area of land around the Black Sea suitable for growing cotton and tea. Point both cotton and tea were very popular commodities in Europe at this time, and could almost be regarded as hard currency. Point yes, Russia was still a major tea producing country in Europe at this time, and had a long history. It has been cultivated since the 17th century, but has not been accepted by mainstream Europe due to its poor quality. Point it was not until 1817 that modern Russian dark tea emerged, after first purchasing high quality seeds from the Qing dynasty, and then planting them near the Black Sea at lower latitudes. Ever since, the Russians began to think intensively about the Ottoman Black Sea region. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.